Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the fog-drenched airfields of the Second World War. Picture this, it's barely dawn, the wind smells like fuel and frost, and every breath you take clouds the air inside your mask. All around you, the metallic cough of engines warming up blends with the distant clang of tools. You trudge across the muddy tarmac toward a waiting bomber, boots heavy, mind foggy, fingers curled around something small, maybe a charm, maybe nonsense. It's tucked deep in your pocket. You don't talk about it. No one does. But you never fly without it. Your name might be Jack. Or Joe. Maybe you're from Kansas, or Liverpool, or Perth. You're 20, maybe. You look 40. And though you've spent more hours in the air than you care to count, this morning, like every morning before a mission, your heart is hammering like a rivet gun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the metal ladder leading into the aircraft. It groans under your weight, as if even the B-17 knows you're back again. Your fingers brush the side of the entry hatch and then, the ritual. You tap the fuselage 3 times. Quick! Quiet! No one notices, but if they did, they wouldn't laugh. They'd just nod. Because everyone's got something. Up in the cockpit, strapped in and waiting for takeoff clearance, you glance across the flight deck. Hanging from the throttle lever, dangling like a prize from a claw machine, is a tiny pair of fuzzy dice. Once red, now faded pink, the corners threadbare. They belong to the pilot before you. And the one before him. Guys who didn't come back. But the dice did. It's funny what sticks. Fuzzy dice, rubber ducks, gumball machine trolls with frizzy blue hair. You name it, someone flew with it. Historians still argue whether these charms actually affected behavior or simply served as coping mechanisms. But down here, in the murk of human fear and adrenaline, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that it made sense to you. And it wasn't just Americans. British bomber crews, freezing over Berlin, carried silk scarves embroidered by sweethearts. One pilot flew every mission with a broken pipe clenched between his teeth. It wasn't even his. He'd found it under his seat before his first flight and figured, what the hell? It stayed with him through 2 engine fires, 1 belly landing, and the time he accidentally dropped his flight map into the onboard loo. The world above 20,000 feet is thin and cruel. Your skin chaps, your bones ache, your lips crack until they bleed. At that altitude, air becomes a hostile rumor. So you hang on to anything soft, anything lucky. One gunner wrapped a strip of his baby blanket around his bootlace. Another wore a belt buckle from his grandfather's old uniform, Spanish-American War, 1898. He called it the anchor. And somehow, it held. Down on the airstrip, ground crew had their own tokens. One mechanic carried a chipped ceramic rabbit. Another refused to wear gloves, no matter how cold, because once, just once, he wore them and the plane never came back. After that, he'd work barehanded in sleet if he had to. My hands, he'd say, ain't the ones flying. And that's the thing. These weren't just keepsakes. They were contracts. Promises made silently to the sky. If I wear this. If I tap that bolt. If I hum the song my sister sang the day I left home. Then maybe I'll make it back. There's a quiet kind of magic in that logic. A bedtime fairytale retooled for men with fuel on their boots and frost in their eyebrows. You knew it wasn't rational, but neither was the flak exploding around you. One pilot carried a crumpled receipt from a diner in Chicago. He said the eggs were so bad, nothing worse could happen to him again. That receipt outlived 2 engines and a near miss with a Messerschmitt. Then there were the shared charms, objects passed from crew to crew. A lighter engraved with initials no one recognized. A toothpick holder shaped like a pig. One squadron had a baseball sign to Jimmy, though no one remembered who Jimmy was. If the item survived a mission, it got bragging rights. Maybe even a name. You lean back in your seat, the engine's starting to hum now. The dice sway gently. The gunner behind you is muttering again, his usual pre-flight rant about scrambled eggs and how he's definitely retiring to California if he survives this war. You smile. That's his charm. The grumble. The dream. They work as well as any silver spoon or rabbit's foot. Mainstream historians will tell you about aircraft specs, sortie statistics, loss ratios. But no spreadsheet can capture what it feels like to check your pocket twice, always twice, for the tiny carved horse your kid brother gave you. He said it would help you gallop home. And there's the tragedy, too. Sometimes, only the charms came back. Ground crew would find a little bundle tucked in a flight suit. A ring. A photo. A strip of cloth. And they'd send it home with a letter, "This was found with your son." That object would take on new power, a relic now. Proof they were real. Proof they flew. There's a story about a pilot who flew with a tiny silver spoon he stole from a Paris cafe. Said it reminded him that good food still existed. He flew 12 missions. On the 13th, the spoon fell out of his pocket before takeoff. He panicked. Delayed the mission trying to find it. His CO told him to get over it. He flew anyway. He made it back. And then never flew again. What changed? Maybe he figured the spoon had given all it could. Maybe he just got lucky and knew better than to push it. Or maybe, just maybe, the war was never about planes and bombs alone. It was about finding something, anything, that made sense in a world unraveling. Above your head, the intercom crackles. Time to go. You press your thumb against the buckle of your harness, right where you stitched in that square of cloth from your childhood tent. You don't remember why you took it, or when. But it's there. And it's staying. And as the bomber lifts off, the ground slipping away beneath you like wet silk, you hear the rattle of dice, the hum of old engines, and the whispered prayers of hundreds of young men, all carrying something small, something strange, and something that helped them believe they'd see morning. The engines growl louder now, climbing into the clouds like a weary beast waking up for work. You feel the rumble in your chest, in your boots, in that sliver of bone behind your ear. The airfield disappears below you. Trees shrink. Cows turn into ants. The world becomes soft and far away, except for what's inside your pockets and what's inside your head. You shift in your seat, the harness biting just a little at your shoulder. That familiar discomfort is weirdly comforting. It's all part of the routine now. Your fingers drift unconsciously toward the inside pocket of your flight jacket. Still there. A wooden yo-yo, smooth to a shine after dozens of flights. You never actually play with it. But it came from your baby brother. He pressed it into your palm the day you left, said, "This way you don't forget how to come back down." It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, which you never do. But out here, in a metal tube with wings and enough high-octane fuel to barbecue a small town, you don't question gifts like that. You weren't alone in bringing pieces of childhood into the cockpit. One British pilot carried a small stuffed elephant, frayed ears, stitched smile, missing tail. It had lived in his bunk as a child, and now lived in his helmet bag. It didn't match the uniform. But it matched something deeper. A sense of who he'd been before he was asked to fly into enemy territory every other Tuesday. There's a story, true or embellished, no one's sure about a US Navy pilot who always flew with a marble. Just one, solid blue with a swirl of green, the kind you might find rolling under a school desk. He kept it in his sock. Not his pocket, too obvious. He said it helped him keep his footing. One mission, the marble rolled out during takeoff. He practically stood the plane on its nose to find it mid-flight. He said flying without it felt like flying barefoot through lightning. Historians still argue whether these behaviors were superstition or early indicators of stress and PTSD. But those of you who've ever watched a 5-year-old clutch a security blanket before bedtime know that logic doesn't live here. These charms were lullabies disguised as objects. Reassurances that the sky might be high and cruel, but you still carried a whisper of something warm and safe. A gunner in the Pacific Theater once wore a cardboard crown. The kind you'd get at a birthday party. His niece had sent it in a care package, along with a note that read, "For Uncle Pete, the Sky King." He laughed so hard he cried. Then he wore it under his helmet. Every flight. One day, someone borrowed his helmet without asking, and the crown went missing. He nearly got court-martialed for decking the guy in the mess hall. But no one touched his gear again. You hear a crackle in your headset, routine checks, call signs, a joke about someone snoring. Outside, clouds begin to smear across the windows. Your co-pilot adjusts the altimeter. You glance at the flight engineer. He's got a small ragdoll pinned to his chest. Nothing creepy, just something his daughter made in school. 2 buttons, red yarn hair, and a tiny stitched smile that never falters, even at 20,000 feet. They call it Commander Flaps. It's absurd. It's sacred. And it's not just objects. Some guys flew with melodies. A harmonica in a sock. A broken ukulele with 1 string. One pilot insisted on listening to the same scratched Glenn Miller record before every mission. Said if the saxophone didn't skip in the second verse, they'd make it back. The day it skipped twice? They were shot at, but not hit. He claimed it was a partial omen. Others recited lines from old movies or books. The guy behind you now? He quotes Sherlock Holmes before takeoff. Every time. Come, Watson, come. The game is afoot. He says it like a punchline, but his voice always tightens just a little. One particularly creative crew flew with a miniature model of their own plane, painstakingly built from cigarette cartons and glue. They kept it in a pouch under the radio table. The model was nicknamed Shadowbird. The idea, they said, was that as long as the model was intact, the real plane would be too. The irony? They were grounded for engine trouble the one time the model went missing. Coincidence? Maybe. But they rebuilt the model that night, just in case. And there was always the poetry. Not published stuff, personal scribbles. Letters from home, notes to themselves. One pilot wrote the same 3 lines on his flight log every morning. Left with luck. Right with love. Eyes on clouds, not stars above. He never told anyone what it meant. Some say it was a reference to his 2 daughters. Others say it was just his version of a prayer. Doesn't matter, really. The act of writing it, of repeating the ritual, was the point. Something to hold onto when the sky tried to shake you loose. A surprising number of pilots tucked photos of childhood pets into their flight suits. A black lab named Duke. A one-eyed cat named Mr. Mustard. One tail gunner had a photo of a goldfish in a glass bowl. He said the fish's name was Phil, and he hadn't flushed Phil when he left for training. Phil had survived 2 winters. If Phil's still swimming, he said, so am I. Now, there were skeptics. Guys who scoffed at charms. Who said it was all bunk and bravado. But even those guys had habits. A certain number of chews per stick of gum. Always tying the right boot first. Never sitting in a particular seat at the canteen. Call it what you want, it all served the same fragile need, control, in a world that offered none. Remember the fuzzy dice? Well, the base quartermaster once tried to confiscate them. Said it was a distraction. Unprofessional. The next flight without them ended in a crash. The surviving crew pulled ration stamps to buy them back. From that day on, even the quartermaster gave them a little nod before each mission. Up here, rituals are stitched into the fuselage. They hum beneath your seat. They live in the sock drawer of your soul, next to fear and the fading scent of home. Whether it's a slingshot from 3rd grade or a crumpled movie ticket from your last date before deployment, these little relics remind you who you are and why you want to come back. Outside the window, the sky darkens. Clouds pile like dirty laundry, soft but dangerous. You tighten your grip on the yoke, feel the hum of the engine settle into a rhythm you've come to know like a lullaby. And in your pocket, the yo-yo is warm from your body heat. Smooth. Solid. Real. You remember your brother's voice again. So you don't forget how to come back down. Your breath fogs the window just slightly, even through the thick glass and leather helmet. Below, the landscape has changed, it's less familiar now. No more tidy hedgerows or lazy rivers curling through farm fields. You're over foreign ground. Occupied ground. And though it's quiet in the cockpit, your body knows this isn't home. It never forgets. You slide your thumb along the edge of your dog tags. Not for the name or the number. For the comfort of metal. Something solid. Tethering. But just below them, tucked behind the fabric of your shirt, is a stranger object, a tiny horseshoe, no larger than a bottle cap. It's bronze. Kind of misshapen. You found it in a market stall in Tunis, traded a pack of Lucky Strikes for it and a slice of overripe melon. You don't even believe in horseshoes. But the merchant told you, with a wide smile and 2 missing teeth, that it had belonged to a racing donkey named Kozim who had never lost a race. How could you not keep it? These are the things no one trains you for. The logic of charms. The currency of luck. And the uncomfortable truth that pilots are both scientists of air and high priests of superstition. You calculate lift and drag like a textbook wizard, then whisper to a sock puppet before taxiing. One RAF squadron in North Africa used to rub their propeller bolts with garlic before dawn missions. A nod to ancient Roman beliefs about garlic warding off evil. The ground crew hated it, everything reeked, but no one dared stop. The first time they forgot? A flak shell hit the engine cowling. The pilot survived, but the prop bolt split clean in 2. After that, garlic became as essential as fuel. There's a certain American pilot you might have bunked near. Big guy, Nebraska farm boy type. He had a secret, a tiny porcelain frog hidden in his boot. Borrowed it from his mother's garden before he shipped out. He said frogs brought rain and peace in some native legends. This one had a chip in its eye and looked perpetually confused. But he swore it worked. He flew 33 missions and never lost an engine. When his crew asked what would happen if he forgot the frog, he said, "Deadpan, then I'll land in a cabbage field and marry a goose." Quirky? Sure. But here's what people forget, World War II pilots weren't made of myth and marble. They were made of longing and habit. Fear wrapped in routine. The skies they flew were monstrous and beautiful and indifferent. So they surrounded themselves with the irrational, the sentimental, the flat-out bizarre. Because irrationality has its own gravity when logic runs dry. There was a B-24 bombardier who believed in comic strips. He would cut out the Sunday funnies from weeks-old newspapers and line his navigation folder with them. Said it reminded him not to take himself too seriously when calculating how to drop 2,000 pounds of high explosives. One time he slipped and included the obituary page by mistake. That flight? Engine fire. Coincidence? Maybe. But Garfield became a permanent co-pilot after that. You remember someone's voice, was it your flight instructors, who said that Lucky Charms were just camouflage for anxiety? That superstition was the enemy of professionalism. Easy to say when you're not the one drawing flak over France in a thunderstorm with your co-pilot vomiting into a canvas bag. And yet, some objects seemed more communal. Shared talismans. Squadron-level totems. One Canadian unit kept a pink flamingo lawn ornament bolted to the tail of their lead aircraft. Someone had mailed it from Miami as a joke. It stuck. Operation Plastic Bird became a thing. After every safe return, the flamingo got a fresh coat of nail polish. Once lavender. Once glitter. They said the day it peeled was the day you stayed grounded. Even the Germans had their traditions. One Luftwaffe pilot carried a tiny spool of red thread. He claimed his grandmother had woven it during World War I to protect his father. He wrapped a few inches around the base of his control stick before every flight. If it frayed or tore, he said, he'd turn back. It only tore once. He still turned back. Historians still debate whether these rituals created confidence or simply distracted the brain. Some argue it was about muscle memory, linking belief to behavior. Others say it was pure psychological insulation, like stuffing cotton into your ears before a thunderclap. And then there are those who insist, with a shrug, that belief itself was the point. That the charm didn't need to work, it just had to exist. On your third mission, the guy to your left, nervous, shaky, was trying to light a cigarette. His hands fumbled. You offered to help, struck the match. He had a rabbit's foot on his keychain. Not the soft kind. The grisly kind. Still had claws. You asked where he got it. He said his grandpa took it from a rabbit that escaped the Germans in the last war. You didn't ask follow-ups. He didn't survive that mission. His charm, now scorched, ended up on the flight room bulletin board. No one touched it. But no one removed it either. For months, it just hung there, silent, softening in the dust. Sometimes the charm outlived the charm's owner. And other times, it passed on. You remember the flight jacket passed you from an older pilot rotating home. The zipper stuck. The lining was torn. But in the inside pocket? A photograph of someone else's wife and someone else's dog. A small shell, sea-polished, glued to the tag. He told you to leave it there. It's a lighthouse, he said. For when you forget where you are. You kept it. Still do. One night, someone handed you a coin. Not a special coin, really, just a beaten-up penny with a scratch down the middle. Rub this before takeoff, he said. But only with your left hand. You laughed. Then you did it. Then you made it back. And you've rubbed that penny with your left hand ever since. You'd be surprised what people believed. A French pilot swore that if he whispered his lover's name just before wheels up, his flight would be smooth. One American thought chewing spearmint gum during takeoff brought good luck, but wintergreen meant engine failure. A Polish ace insisted on blinking exactly 6 times when taxiing onto the runway. Not 5. Not 7. Did they know it was nonsense? Sure. But the sky doesn't care what you know. The sky only cares what you carry. And you? You carry a lot. Some of it in your hands. Some of it in your chest. Some of it, quietly, absurdly, in the shape of a mini plastic duck tucked into your map case. Don't worry, your secret's safe.
You press 2 fingers against the side of your cockpit seat, right above where the leather has darkened from thousands of others doing the same. A worn spot. Almost polished. And you realize, without thinking, you've been tapping it twice before every flight. Just a habit. Or is it? The truth is, you don't remember when you started doing it. Somewhere between Mission 5 and Mission 9, maybe. After the engine fire. Or maybe it was after you switched to a new squadron and found that tiny cat-shaped button wedged behind your seat harness. You'd thought about tossing it, but instead you slid it into your breast pocket. A feline co-pilot, mute and unblinking. Tonight, we're diving even deeper into this strange ecosystem of airborne luck. Because superstition didn't stop at horseshoes and frogs. No, it bled into everything, from the way pilots dressed to the order in which they boarded their planes. The battlefield may have been in the air, but the real contest was often in the mind. Take flight suits. Regulation issue, khaki or olive drab. Functional. But beneath them? Socks from home. Mismatched. Sometimes inside out. One RAF pilot had a rule, never wear socks that match on bombing runs. Makes you symmetrical, he said. And symmetry is unlucky. You'd heard weirder logic in your time. There was an American PA-47 pilot stationed in Italy who believed every 4th mission was cursed. So, on those days, he'd pack a potato in his flight bag. Not to eat. Just to throw the hex off. Can't die on a day you bring lunch, he joked. One day the potato went missing. He flew anyway. Engine trouble at 8,000 feet. Limped home on fumes. After that? He packed two. Charms weren't limited to objects. Whole routines took on a kind of holy rhythm. You knew a pilot who had to shave before flying. Always. Even if the mission was at 3 a.m. He believed stubble caused drag. Probably nonsense. But once he forgot, and the cloud ceiling was lower than forecasted. They came back late, rattled, near out of fuel. He was clean-shaven every time after that. Historians still argue whether these rituals provided comfort or control. Some say they were early self-hypnosis tricks, anchoring the mind to something predictable amid chaos. Others argue they were performance habits, like a baseball pitcher adjusting his cap 3 times before a curveball. But here in the cockpit, it doesn't feel academic. It feels necessary. One pilot you flew with carried a single bullet in his pocket. Not one he planned to use. Just a shell he'd picked up from a training range. Insurance, he said. If I've got this one, it means that's one fewer out there meant for me. You laughed, but you remember the way he'd press it between his palms like a prayer stone before every sortie. And let's talk about names, call signs, nose art, the whole theatre of airborne identity. Your crew once flew in a plane named Lady Pumpernickel. Why? No one knew. But there was something soothing about her painted face, smiling coyly from the fuselage. Even if her lipstick was peeling. The superstition was, never rename a bird. Even if the old name makes no sense. The moment you rechristen her, it's bad luck. You rename Thunder Goose and suddenly you're landing on 3 wheels and 1 prayer. Names weren't the only thing sacred. There were chants. Silly ones. Nonsense rhymes whispered during pre-flight. Grease the rudder, butter the skies, don't let Jerry make me fry. You heard that one from a British pilot after 4 cups of coffee and 2 hours of sleep. He said his father taught him. Before every motorbike ride during the last war. Some charms were gifted. A Red Cross nurse once handed you a scrap of blue fabric stitched with a crooked 4-leaf clover. For luck, she said, pressing it into your palm with a wink. You didn't want to keep it. But something told you to. You tucked it under your radio panel. Forgot about it. Months later, during a rough landing, the panel popped open. Out fluttered the clover scrap. You swear it caught the sunlight just right. And you remember thinking, well, that's something. One crew chief insisted every plane that left his line had to be touched, lightly, reverently, on the nose cone. He called it booping the bird. Said it reminded the aircraft to come home. You laughed when he said that, but you always made sure he was there for your takeoff. There's an open question among historians, why pilots, specifically, seem to accumulate more charms than infantry or sailors. One theory? Altitude. You spend hours suspended between heaven and hell, with the sky a cold, uncaring void. You want to tether yourself to something, anything, that feels alive. A trinket. A tune. Even a color. Color, by the way, had its own set of rules. Red gloves were bad luck. Green scarves? Good. Yellow pencils? Avoid at all costs. There was even a brief craze in 1943 where pilots avoided anything violet, thanks to a rumor that a bomber went down over the channel carrying a bouquet of violets in the navigator's satchel. The press never reported it, but word spread like wildfire. Violets were out. Daisies were in. You remember one airman, quiet type, from Brooklyn, who collected matchbooks. Every city he landed in, he'd pocket one. But only the ones with jokes on the inside flap. Got to keep the war funny, he said. Before every mission, he'd light a match, read the joke out loud, and say, "All right, Jerry. Laugh this off." Most of the jokes were awful. You laughed anyway. Even aircraft maintenance had its share of rituals. Grease guns were never to be set down nozzle first. Tools arranged left to right, smallest to largest, no exceptions. One mechanic swore that humming Blue Danube while calibrating the altimeter ensured it would read true. Did it? Who knows? But nobody argued. And then there were the letters. Not love letters, though there were plenty of those, too. No, these were letters to no one. You'd write them on hotel stationery or ration boxes. Sometimes they were apologies. Sometimes thank yous. Sometimes just nonsense. You'd fold them and tuck them in your boot. And every so often, you'd read one before a mission. Just to remind yourself that you still had something to say, even if no one ever heard it. You once found a crumpled note under your seat. Tell Marjorie I kept the key. No name. No address. Just that. You kept it. Pinned it inside your flight bag. Never told anyone. And through it all, you wondered, was it the charm? Or just the act of choosing to believe in the charm? Did the bullet, or the potato, or the coin really matter? Or was it simply the muscle memory of hope? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that, in a world burning at both ends, in skies that could vanish you in seconds, these small acts of absurdity reminded you that you were still human. Still hoping. Still choosing to live. Because when you close the cockpit canopy and the world shrinks to dials and buzzers and your own breath in your throat, a sock turned inside out might be the only thing between you and panic. And for some strange, quiet reason, it helps. You're 20 minutes from target and the world is all grey angles. Your ears ache from the pressure shift, the oxygen mask itches, and somewhere beneath your seat, the lucky penny you taped to the floor has worked itself loose. It rattles faintly with every bump in the air. You try not to notice it. But you do. Tonight, we're slipping deeper into the cockpit's quiet theatre of superstition. Not just the objects anymore, but the invisible lines, those unwritten rules of behavior that shaped entire squadrons. Rituals that became gospel, not because they were in the manual, but because one guy did them once, survived, and now everyone copies him. Take crew formations. There were pilots who insisted on flying in the same place in the formation every single time, upper right, rear left, wherever, because once, months ago, they flew that slot and nothing bad happened. Never mind strategy. It was about mojo. You'd see arguments erupt over who got to fly the lucky number 3 slot, as if it came with an invisible shield. Even coffee wasn't safe from ritual. One guy you bunked with swore by 2 sugars, 1 cream, stirred counterclockwise before every mission. Not for taste, he hated sweet coffee, but because once he stirred clockwise and someone in his group took flak damage. After that? Counterclockwise or bust. There was a BA-17 gunner in your squadron named Rizzo who wore his mother's brooch in his boot. Didn't tell anyone for the first few months. Then someone saw it and teased him. He shrugged and said, "It's steel. Might stop a bullet." It wouldn't, of course. But after that, 3 other gunners started keeping trinkets in their boots. One had a St. Christopher medal, another a flattened spoon, the third a chunk of pink soap wrapped in gauze. Nobody asked why. Historians still argue whether these collective rituals formed organically or were a kind of unconscious group therapy, shared illusions to soothe private terrors. Whatever the reason, they stuck. You didn't mess with someone else's routine, and they didn't mess with yours. And when the bell rang for another mission, everyone returned to their pre-flight pageantry like dancers on opening night. Even silence had meaning. There was a pilot, Callahan, who never spoke once the engines were on. Not a word. Not even to his co-pilot. He believed that words could rattle the luck. It made flying with him eerie, like riding with a ghost. But he was one of the steadiest flyers in the unit. Never missed a target, never got hit. Until one day, someone cracked a joke over the intercom. Just a harmless wisecrack. Callahan gave a tiny laugh. That was the day they got flak near Frankfurt. Nothing catastrophic, just a few holes in the tail and one busted rudder cable, but after that, Callahan went back to his rule. Absolute silence. You flew with him once. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was surgical. Back at base, the rituals continued. Pilots walked the same path to the mess hall every morning. Stepped over certain cracks. Sat at the same end of the same table. Not for company, but for continuity. You start to believe that sameness holds the universe together. Switch it up, and who knows what domino you tip over. Laundry was also involved. Socks washed on Sundays only. Underwear never changed on mission day. You'd think hygiene would trump habit, but no, comfort was measured in degrees of routine, not degrees Fahrenheit. There was even one guy who wore the same undershirt for 47 missions. By the end, it looked like a tea bag someone had stepped on. But he kept wearing it. Until it vanished one day, and he blamed a string of bad landings on its absence. Then there were music rituals. On some airfields, squadrons had mission music, songs they'd play before takeoff. I'll be seeing you, or in the mood. Sometimes sentimental, sometimes just brassy just to pump the blood. One British crew had a copy of Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries they played ironically before every recon run. Makes the clouds part, they claimed. You weren't convinced. But the clouds did often part. And speaking of clouds, some crews believed certain weather patterns were omens. Red sunrise? Good luck. Fast-moving cumulus clouds? Avoid. One guy thought contrails were messages from the future. Said if his plane left a clean one, it meant a clean getaway. If it was choppy or broken, he'd ask to be reassigned. No one indulged him, but no one dismissed him either. You remember one mechanic who painted a tiny squirrel inside the cowling of every plane he serviced. Just a squirrel. No explanation. When asked, he'd say, "They like nuts, and we're all nuts up here." After he rotated out, the new guy kept up the tradition. Not because he believed in squirrel blessings, but because everyone else did. There was one mission, you remember it clearly, where your own superstition let you down. You'd forgotten to tap the compass housing twice before takeoff. Midway through, your heading went dead. No compass, no fix. You were flying blind for 10 minutes. Coincidence? Probably. But after that, you double-tapped the compass. Every single time. There were even rituals for when things went wrong. If you lost a wingman, some pilots had gestures, a small salute before sleep, a black ribbon on their coffee mug, a silent walk to the end of the runway at dusk. Not to mourn. Not quite. More like an acknowledgement, the system cracked. And tomorrow, you had to pretend it hadn't. One oddball in the ground crew had a thing about birds. He'd toss crumbs on the tarmac every morning and said the number of birds that showed up predicted how many planes came back. 2 sparrows equals full return. 1 crow equals expect trouble. 3 pigeons equals mixed bag. When someone asked what 0 birds meant, he said, "We don't fly on 0 bird days." They laughed, but after one such day ended in a crash, they paid closer attention. And letters came into play again. Some crews wrote pre-mission letters and sealed them in envelopes marked "Do Not Open." They weren't last words, just thoughts, observations, confessions. Some were funny, some raw. One was just a list of soup flavors. They weren't to be mailed unless something went wrong. Some bases had boxes for them. Others had pilots tuck them under their mattresses. You wrote one once. Never sealed it. Never sent it. But it's still somewhere in your footlocker. Folded 8 times over and yellowed at the edges. You haven't read it in years. You're not sure you want to. Historians love to debate whether these behaviors were quaint, silly, or indicative of deeper psychological strain. But sitting in your seat, engine humming, sky darkening ahead, there's nothing silly about it. These patterns help make the war survivable. Not in body, perhaps, but in spirit. They're anchors in the free fall. And you realize something strange: for all the training, all the discipline, all the military planning, it's the small, personal nonsense that keeps the fear at bay. The rubber duck wedged in the gunner's helmet. The toothpick a navigator always chewed before a bombing run. The exact, exasperating way your co-pilot flicks the altimeter even though it doesn't change a thing. And you? You still tap the compass. You still fly the left slot when you can. And you still carry that bent, rusted pin from your high school varsity jacket. It's worthless. But it's your lucky charm. Even now, you check your pocket, just to be sure it's there. You wake before the alarm, again, and stare up at the canvas ceiling of your tent, which trembles softly with the desert wind. Or maybe it's rain outside, or fog, or cold Baltic air whipping down from some frozen edge of Europe. You've slept in so many places now, it's hard to tell. What you do know, with the kind of certainty that matters to your bones, is that you'll reach for the same thing before your boots, your charm. It's not that you believe in magic. Of course not. But then again, you've seen enough patterns in chaos to know that belief, any belief, is its own kind of parachute. So you reach under your cot and feel around for it, a crushed cap from a soda bottle, bent into a slight curve from the weight of your gear last month. You found it wedged in the mud outside a gas truck and pocketed it without thinking. Then you flew a mission with 0 issues. So it stayed. Today we're following how these beliefs evolved from mere habits into full-blown talismans, passed from one crew to another, sometimes with ceremony, sometimes with total secrecy. Lucky charms weren't just tokens. They were currency. Insurance. Sacred objects, born not from religion, but from repetition, coincidence, and pure, stubborn hope. Take, for instance, the case of the wishing ring. Not gold. Just brass, crudely shaped and clearly handmade. The story goes that it started with a flight engineer who bent a bit of shrapnel around his finger and said, "It'll grant one safe mission." Just one. After he completed that mission, he passed it to the tail gunner. The gunner wore it. Came back. Passed it on. Eventually, it moved through 6 crews and over 40 missions. Then it vanished. Some say it was lost during a storm over Dresden. Others claim it was buried with the last man who wore it, just before the war ended. Either way, that ring was a piece of myth by the time you showed up. And everyone still kept half an eye out for it. Historians still argue whether items like that were a symptom of strained nerves or a form of harmless comfort. But out here, where superstition and survival blur like contrails in high sun, there's little time to analyze. You remember how Sergeant Muldoon, a guy from Missouri with a voice like gravel soup, carried a tiny box of sugar cubes in his chest pocket. Not for tea, he always said. Just keeps the devil guessing. No one knew what that meant. But Muldoon flew 39 successful sorties. When he went stateside, he left the box to you. You still don't know what to do with it. You've never touched the cubes. But they're still in your bag. Not all charms were worn. Some were drawn. One pilot you met sketched a blue star on the inside of every bomb bay door he flew with, never the same shape, never the same angle. Just a star. Sharp and quiet. He never explained it, and no one asked. Another gunner painted a cartoon dog with boxing gloves on every piece of gear he owned. Helmets, flight log, even the canvas strap on his oxygen mask. He said it came from a newspaper strip back home. After every safe return, he added one more glove. By war's end, the dog had 7 paws. All gloved. But you've seen darker talismans too. One Canadian pilot you flew with for a week carried a bullet in his breast pocket. Not a round from the enemy, his own. He dug it out of the fuselage after a friendly fire incident. Lucky one, he said. Could have been in me. He wrapped it in gauze and kept it like a saint's relic. Then there's the matter of shared charms, those that passed between crews, sometimes as a gesture of camaraderie, other times as a desperate plea. If a crew had too many close calls, they might beg to borrow a charm from another squadron. A tie pin, a trinket, a worn glove. The practice was called mooching mojo. You did it once. Borrowed a chewed-up pencil stub from a Brit named Gordon. You returned it, reluctantly, after surviving a stormy run to Munich. He later mailed it back to you. The letter said, "She's yours now. Treat her kindly." Even naming aircraft became part of the charm system. Pilots gave their planes cheeky or protective names: Heavenly Hussy, Spirit of Tuesday, Bad Penny. You flew once in a B-24 called Naptime, which had a cartoon bear painted under its nose and tally marks along the bomb bay. The nose art wasn't just for laughs, it was a warding spell, a name to make the machine feel like a companion. No one wanted to fly in an unnamed aircraft. That felt like going to war with a ghost. You remember one crew that changed their plane's name mid-tour, just repainted the whole thing overnight after a bad run. They said it was cursed. A mechanic tried to sand down the old name, Foxhole Betty, but you could still see the ghost of the lettering under the new name, Lucky Jane. After that, the engine started stalling randomly. People said the spirit of Betty wasn't done with them. Your squadron leader, a guy everyone called Biscuit, carried a deck of cards in his left boot. Not a full deck. Just 3 cards, the Queen of Hearts, the 6 of Clubs, and a blank joker someone had drawn a moustache on. He never explained the combination. When asked, he'd just say, "They know the score." You don't think he meant the enemy. Food had its part to play too. You recall one radio operator who swore that eating exactly 2 pickled onions before every flight kept him alert. He never once flew without them. When supplies ran low and he had to swap for regular onions, he refused to go up. No tang, no altitude, he said. He finally agreed to a compromise, sniffing the jar instead. The plane landed safely. The habit continued. Another guy kept a melted candy bar in his vest. Not to eat. Just to carry. A gift from his daughter, melted on the train down to basic. He never replaced it, even when it turned into something between syrup and sediment. And pets, yes, pets, played their role. One unit kept a goat. Another had a one-eyed cat named General Montgomery. You saw a picture once of a monkey in a pilot's lap, though you're not sure that one was real. But dogs were common. Mostly mutts. Mascots of the airfield. Everyone believed stroking the dog's head before takeoff brought a safe return. If the dog wasn't around, you were out of luck. You once missed takeoff because the mascot terrier hadn't returned from scavenging biscuits in the officer's tent. You waited, found him, gave him a pat, and then boarded. No one questioned the delay. In fact, one guy gave you a thumbs up as you climbed aboard. Some charms were auditory. A few pilots had pre-luck phrases, little rhymes, blessings, or jokes they'd whisper to themselves. One guy muttered feather and frost every time he buckled in. What did it mean? No one knew. But it worked for him. Another sang the same 2 bars from a popular jazz tune under his breath, even if the rest of the crew found it maddening. You grew to like it, actually. Gave the takeoff a rhythm. Like a heartbeat. Historians sometimes dismiss all this as folklore. Ephemera. A symptom of exhausted minds clinging to control in uncontrollable skies. Maybe. But you've lived it. You've seen how one man's rabbit's foot can calm an entire crew. How the tiny cross stitched onto a pair of gloves becomes the only thing standing between someone and panic. You've made your own rituals, too. You keep your scarf tied the same way every mission, one knot, folded under. Never loose. You always glance at the tail rudder before boarding, and you always touch the edge of your map, even if you don't plan to use it. Is any of it rational? Of course not. Is any of it necessary? Absolutely. Because when you're strapped into a tin can at 30,000 feet, crossing flak-riddled skies, all you've got are your instincts, your training, and your tiny army of charms. They may not stop bullets. They may not sway fate. But they help you breathe. And tonight, as you check the soda cap in your pocket one more time, you know that it matters. Because it's yours. And it got you home. You feel the weight of the mission before your feet even leave the ground. It's in the air, the kind of heavy, silent tension you've come to associate with overcast skies and short replies. And yet, you perform every ritual exactly as usual. Scarf tied. Glove on left first. Right boot laced, then left. Your soda cap charm pressed between your thumb and forefinger like a button that might call down mercy. And then you wait. Not for the briefing, that's already happened. Not for takeoff clearance, that'll come. You wait for the signs. Because out here, before engines spin and propellers blur the edge of vision, there's a quiet theater of superstition playing out across the airfield. Pilots and crew, each with their own small gestures, playing out unspoken scripts. Some stretch the truth, sure. Say they don't believe in any of it. But then they'll tap the same wing strut every time they walk past it. Just because. Just in case. You've seen it 100 times. One guy, Jensen, won't fly unless the crew dog sneezes. Seriously. He started noticing that the pup would sneeze near the hangar before missions that went well. One day, no sneeze, and his plane took flak damage. Ever since, Jensen carries a small tin of pepper in his pocket. He gives it a discreet shake near the dog's nose and waits. If the dog doesn't sneeze, he forgets to file his oxygen mask check. This, believe it or not, is par for the course. Entire crews have their collective habits, shared rituals that must be observed, like liturgies for flight. On your own crew, there's a tradition of humming Happy Birthday softly during the final check of the bomb release system. Why? Because the first time it was done, back in Tunisia, it happened to be the engineer's birthday, and the mission went flawlessly. The song stuck. Now it's a requirement, even if no one's born in June. Historians still argue whether these small behaviors were early examples of group psychology, nonverbal tools to reduce tension and synchronize focus, or simply manifestations of fear. But again, down here, far from the classroom, you don't need a lecture. You just need rhythm. Take the mechanic who lines up all the wrenches in a specific left-to-right order before signing off on engine clearance. Doesn't matter who's watching. Doesn't matter if he used only 2 of them. They all go out on the bench. If he skips it, he'll chase the plane down the runway. Or the navigator who always carries a children's book tucked into his vest, a tattered copy of Peter Rabbit, given to him by his niece. He says it helps with headings. No one presses for explanation. You just accept it. It's part of the system now. One time, a visiting officer tried to tell everyone to cut out the voodoo and focus on procedures. He lasted 4 days. After his 3rd consecutive mission returned early with mechanical issues, he transferred out. Left behind his lucky lighter. No one has used it since. It sits in a box near the main radio, cursed, people say, but also revered. Like a warning buoy bobbing on calm water. Of course, some signs are bigger, louder, almost theatrical. You remember a co-pilot who wouldn't speak at all for 10 minutes before takeoff. Not a vow of silence exactly, more like a buffer zone. He said it let him reset. During that time, you'd hear the rest of the crew muttering things like, "Quiet hours on," and shuffle more softly around him. The gunner on your last flight, a wiry guy named Link, had a rubber frog he'd placed just behind the dorsal turret. Not near enough to interfere. Just present. "He watches the sky for me," Link would say. You once asked if it had a name. "Nope," he replied. He hasn't earned one yet. Then there are the weather signs. Not meteorological reports. Those you trust less than luck. No, these are the tiny local signs. If the coffee at mess is unusually hot, that's a bad omen. If the quartermaster whistles a tune from home, that's good. And if your shadow touches the nose gear before you climb aboard? Some folks turn back. You try to keep yours behind you. Or off to the side. Even the natural world seems folded into the logic of signs. A lone bird on the runway? That's a watcher. You don't fly until it flies first. Spilled oil shaped like a crescent moon under the bomb bay? That means someone's going to lose radio contact mid-mission. One mechanic swore that missions always went better when the first word of the morning was beans. You may laugh. You probably should laugh. But you still say beans under your breath most mornings, just in case. One of your flight engineers, Griggs, with the eyebrows that look like feral caterpillars, had a running theory that the color of your socks changed your luck. Red was bad. Grey was cursed. Blue was fine. White was invisible to fate. He kept a pair of white socks in a sealed pouch in his locker. Only wore them when things were really rough. He lent them to you once. After your fourth straight mission in rough skies, you asked. He nodded, opened the pouch with reverence, and handed them over. Don't wash 'em, he said. You didn't. You still have them. Then there's the joke about the ghost in the mirror. It started when someone saw their reflection in the wing flap during twilight and got spooked. Now, if you catch your reflection before boarding, especially if it looks off, you touch the ground twice before climbing in. You've seen pilots pretend not to see anything strange. And others freeze entirely, choosing to wait for another time slot. The rules around these signs evolve constantly. They pass between squadrons, picked up like lichen on boots. Some you remember. Some you inherit. And some you create without even meaning to. You once left your zipper half down on your flight vest during a quick hop between airfields. Nothing happened. In fact, you felt more comfortable. Now, you never zip it all the way. You've told no one. You just do it. A new guy might watch these rituals and scoff. That's fine. You did, too, once. But there comes a day when you buckle in, feel a strange twitch of unease, and realize you skipped something. Something small. A gesture. A step. And you can't breathe right until you do it. Signs. They become your vocabulary with the sky. Sometimes they warn. Sometimes they soothe. Sometimes they lie. But you never stop watching. You remember old Barnes, a pilot so calm you suspected he might be part houseplant. He always carried a cigar in his breast pocket. Never lit it. Never chewed it. Just kept it there. When asked why, he said, "Every man needs one last promise to himself." He died in his sleep after the war. They found the cigar still in his jacket. Not all signs are scary, though. Some are oddly sweet. One plane had a rule: before every takeoff, someone had to compliment the bomber's wheels. Didn't matter how, just something positive. You're looking round today, all those treads could hold up heaven. They swore it kept the tires from blowing out. You laughed the first time you heard it. By your third flight with them, you were praising the axle like a poet. Historians might call all this ritualistic behavior under chronic stress. Maybe they're right. But that misses the point. These signs, these little pieces of borrowed logic and hopeful gestures, aren't just mental tricks. They're the only control you've got. When every cloud might hide a Messerschmitt, and every glint on the ground could be flak, it helps to believe that whistling 3 notes as you fasten your harness might protect you. It might not. But it might. So you keep doing it. And every time you do, you feel just slightly more real. Less like a number on a mission chart. Less like dust in the wind. More like someone who might make it home. That's the secret power of signs. Not that they guarantee safety, but that they give shape to fear. They make uncertainty negotiable. They turn chance into a puzzle you might solve. And tonight, as you walk the flight line, you see someone bending to tie their boots a second time. Another brushing dust from their sleeve with 3 slow strokes. Someone else kissing a photograph and slipping it back into their vest. And you think, this is what we do. This is who we are. Not just pilots. Not just crew. But a congregation of believers in the gospel of maybe. You shuffle into the mess tent before sunrise, bleary-eyed and half-buttoned, the taste of last night's dust still clinging to your teeth. It smells like powdered eggs and burnt coffee, a breakfast blend no one ever requests, but everyone accepts. You grab a tin cup, wrap your fingers around its warm metal sides, and exhale like you're preparing for something more than food. And in a way, you are. Because breakfast, here at WWII, isn't just about sustenance. It's ritual. Repetition. Familiarity. And tucked quietly among the trays of runny porridge and the chatter of early nerves, there are charms. This morning, you sit beside Ahara, your navigator, who lines up 3 raisins on the edge of his tray before every meal. Doesn't eat them. Doesn't explain. Just lines them up like sentries, then scrapes them into his pocket when he's done. You once asked if it was for luck. He shrugged and said, maybe. Or maybe they're watching me back. That's the thing with talismans and rituals, they rarely come with instructions. They evolve. They stick. And sometimes, they're edible. Today's mission is already crawling through your thoughts like an ant parade, but the routines of morning anchor you. A sip of overbrewed coffee. A dry heel of toast. Ahara's raisins. Kowalski's habit of tapping his spoon 3 times against his plate, ding, 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 before the first bite. This section of the war, these quiet, jittery breakfasts, show us how superstition infiltrated even the mundane. The very act of eating became coded with signs and meanings. A bite missed could be blamed for a flak hit. A second serving might be declared unlucky if the mission went sour. Historians still debate how deeply these rituals impacted morale. Some say they offered a sense of control over chaos. Others argue they were simply symptoms of men on the edge, carving order into the shapeless unknown. Either way, it's clear that luck was salted into everything, even hardtack. Take the peanut protocol, for example, an unofficial superstition started by an Australian ground crew in '43. They noticed that every mission involving a lunchbox containing peanuts resulted in the plane returning without incident. Word spread. Soon, pilots across the Pacific were demanding peanut rations, even swapping them for cigarettes or extra fuel coupons. When the peanut supply dried up, some men carried empty shells as surrogates. One airman claimed to have crafted a necklace out of peanut husks. He called it the nut chain. He survived 18 missions. Then there was the no soup on Tuesdays rule adopted by a British squadron after a string of Tuesday missions went badly, and all had followed a meal of canned tomato soup. The soup was banned. Tuesdays became dry menu days. Coincidence? Probably. But after they went 5 Tuesdays without a loss, no one dared challenge the rule. Even what you didn't eat became part of the charm system. One bomber group believed that if a crew member skipped dessert, their mission would be rain-free. This led to comically forced abstinence, with crewmen dramatically sliding away plates of jelly or spotted dick while others cheered. You tried it once. Refused a cookie. The sky still raged with storm clouds, but the guy across from you swore he saw a sunbeam meant just for us. Another curious tale, a bombardier named Franai, who only ate white foods before flying. Mashed potatoes, bread, milk, sometimes a boiled egg, peeled clean. When pressed, he'd mumble something about sky color inside the stomach. A little unsettling, maybe. But Franai never had an engine failure. So people started offering him their mashed potatoes. Food charms weren't just about the meal, they extended to how it was consumed. Forks turned sideways. Knives placed under the plate. Salt pinched and tossed over the left shoulder, even when there was no salt. You saw one man knock twice on the mess table before each bite. Another stared at his spoon for a full 3 seconds, every time. You had your own quirks, though you never admitted them. You always drank the last sip of coffee at the door of the tent. Never inside. Never before. Once, you forgot. The mission was fine. But you didn't feel right. So now, you remember. Then there was breakfast music. Some mess tents had gramophones or radios, tuned to anything that wasn't static. One morning, a scratchy tune by Vera Lynn came on. Everyone froze for a second, then, like a sign, conversation resumed. After that, some men started associating certain songs with good or bad luck. If "We'll Meet Again" played, it meant someone wouldn't. One group in Italy developed a full superstition chart, mapping mission outcomes to songs played during breakfast. It was half joke, half religion. Blue skies was a sure win. Don't sit under the apple tree. Cancel the flight if you can. Even silence had meaning. There were mornings when no one spoke. Not because of fear, but because someone had declared a quiet breakfast, a self-imposed vow, believed to preserve the luck. You participated once. The whole tent ate in silence, save for clinking cutlery and a few suppressed coughs. The mission went smoothly. Silence, then, became sacred. Beyond the dining tents, snacks became sacred objects too. Chewing gum wrappers folded into origami swans. Chocolate bars sliced into even squares and shared like communion. Dried apricots treated like amulets, one in each boot, just in case. One pilot, nervous before his first solo run, bit into a biscuit and declared, "If this crunch is good, I'll make it." It did. He made it. Crunch biscuits became a thing. You saw men tapping them against tin trays, listening for the right snap. Even the absence of food could be lucky. A guy once opened his ration tin to find it completely empty, no label error, no puncture, just nothing. Instead of cursing, he laughed and said, "Guess I'm running light today." He flew, he returned, and his crewmates dubbed him Hollow Tin Harry. The next day, he found 5 men had left their unopened tins on his cot for good measure. And still, among all the rituals and edible tokens, the most poignant were the last bites. These were the small, intentional savors taken just before boarding, a crumb, a sip, a breath of smoke. Some believed it created a thread to pull them home. You took part without even realizing it. That final sip of coffee by the door? That's your last bite. A taste of home, of habit, of safety. Sometimes you think these rituals are more about grounding than luck. About bringing a piece of the real world with you into the sky. Something ordinary. Something human. Because when you're bracing for flak and engine fire and the invisible hand of fate, a stale biscuit suddenly becomes the most stable thing in your life. And if you have to nibble it exactly 3 times, at the same minute, on the same plate, while wearing the same scarf, well, so be it. You step into the crew hut after the mission, boots still crusted with half the continent, shoulders aching, and skin buzzing with adrenaline and sweat and something that might be gratitude. The air inside smells like damp wool, tobacco, and sleep long postponed. It's here, between the peeling walls and creaky bunks, that the real charms often emerge. Not the obvious ones. Not the tidy 4-leaf clovers pinned to collars or the carved wooden crosses tied around necks. No, the most powerful talismans are private. Unassuming. Sometimes ridiculous. And almost always invisible to anyone not looking closely. Like Thompson's glove. You'd think a pilot would want to, right? But not him. Just the one, left hand only. It's cracked leather, fingerless, stained with something that might have once been blood or engine grease or both. He says he found it hanging off a fence post after his first solo flight. Kept it ever since. Claims the glove has never seen a ditch. It's the kind of sentence that only makes sense in a war zone. Or there's little Mikey from the ground crew. You wouldn't notice him unless your engine failed, then he's the guy half covered in soot, cursing affectionately at your spark plugs. Mikey wears a bent dog tag around his ankle like an anklet. It's not his. Belonged to his older brother, who didn't come back from North Africa. Mikey says it keeps him standing where his brother couldn't. Then there's you. You don't tell anyone about the pencil. It's just a plain, chewed-up stub of a thing tucked into your jacket lining. It came from a girl at a train station before you shipped out. You never even caught her name, just that she loaned you a pencil to write a postcard and never asked for it back. Now it's yours. Your pencil. The first thing you check for after a rough landing, even before your own fingers. Historians still argue whether these small tokens had a measurable impact on morale. Some chalk it up to cognitive bias, remembering the times the charm worked, forgetting when it didn't. Others suggest that the ritual itself, regardless of the object, helped stabilize nerves, anchored focus, and provided a rare sense of continuity in a fractured world. It's easy to forget, now, how fragmented things could feel in the sky. You're strapped into a flying metal box with wings that don't care about physics or poetry. A place where logic dissolves under trace of fire, and your training competes with sheer animal instinct. In those moments, a lucky charm isn't superstition, it's structure. It's a rule. And rules are sacred when everything else is guesswork. There's a bombardier named Sullivan who rubs a rabbit's foot before every takeoff. Nothing unique about that, except his is fake. Made of felt and cotton, stitched by his younger sister. Still works, he says. Luck's in the memory, not the material. One evening, you spot the gunner from a neighboring crew silently tying a shoelace around the nose gear. Not to hold anything in place, just to tie it. He says it's for his dog back home, a German shepherd named Radar. Every time I tie a knot, I think of her, he mutters. So far, it's working. And across the way, there's Corporal J. Kim from a Korean-American unit stationed at the same base. He carries a silk talisman bag under his uniform, bokjumioni, he calls it. It's filled with tiny scraps, a coin, a dried orange peel, a folded strip of calligraphy from his grandmother. He says it's for luck, sure, but also for identity. So I don't forget what I was before all this. That hits you harder than you expect. Because that's part of the magic, too. These charms aren't just about survival. They're about remembering who you were before the war started chipping away at your edges. Like Sandoval, the co-pilot with a rosary made from coffee beans. He strung it himself, one bead per mission, soaking them in black coffee until they hardened. When someone asked if it was sacrilegious, he said, "It's more sacred than the war, I'll tell you that." Or Donovan, who tucked an old library card into the sole of his boot. "From when I thought I'd be a teacher," he explained. "This war ends, I'm going back." Even the aircraft had their own lucky items. One squadron was obsessed with bottle caps. They nailed them to the fuselage under the co-pilot's seat. The more caps, the more missions completed. A superstition born from soda and fear and the desperate need to measure time in something other than losses. You once saw a plane with a sock pinned to the cockpit wall. Just a sock. Apparently it belonged to the pilot's kid. Washed weekly. Rehung before every mission. No one laughed. Because in that sock lived a whole world beyond the one filled with gunpowder and checklists. Other objects made less sense, at least on the surface. A spoon bent in half and worn like a pendant. A chess pawn glued to the control stick. A single earring looped around a key ring, never matched, never removed. These tokens weren't logical. They were emotional. Emotional logic is stronger than gravity out here. There's even a crew that kept a potato. Yes, a potato. Found it rolling in a supply crate, declared it theirs crew spud, painted a little mustache on it. They took turns bringing it aboard, always placing it near the tail gun. Potato Patrol, they joked. That potato outlasted 3 planes. You saw it once. It smelled terrible. But no one dared get rid of it. And then there's the matter of when a charm becomes lucky. That's rarely decided at the start. Most of the time, it happens retroactively. You survive. You return. You glance down at your socks and think, well, maybe it was these. Next thing you know, you're hand washing them every night and refusing to switch brands. You tell yourself it's silly. You keep doing it anyway. There's comfort in the irrational. It's why so many charms are traded like sacred relics. When a man is rotated home, he often passes on his token to a newer recruit, an invisible baton in a race no one asked to run. A medallion pressed into a palm. A lucky button sewn into a collar. A tiny figurine stashed in a flight jacket pocket. You received one once. A frayed postcard from Marseille, the corners stained with oil. The pilot handed it to you before boarding his final mission. Not because I need it, he said, but because you do. He never came back. You've carried it ever since. These objects aren't just talismans, they're touchstones. Pieces of people. Echoes of intention. And when you finger the edge of that card, or tap the pencil in your lining, you're not just chasing luck. You're reminding yourself that you're real. And that somewhere beneath the noise, someone once handed you something precious. Because in the end, maybe that's what these charms are for. Not for the sky. Not even for the war. But for the soul. It's pre-dawn again, and the barracks are starting to hum. You're awake before the bugle this time, eyes staring into the pale ceiling, heart pacing itself like it knows something's coming. The pencil in your jacket is still there. You touch it through the fabric. Just to be sure. Across the aisle, one of the rookies is practicing his pre-flight ritual. He's muttering the same 7 words under his breath. Over and over. You've heard it for days now, just before every mission, as he laces his boots, my uncle flew and made it home. That's it. No elaborate tokens, no rabbit's foot. Just a sentence. A charm in sound. This morning is quieter than most. It's foggy, the kind of haze that makes everything seem muffled and close, like the world is hiding under a blanket. The silence draws out small rituals in everyone. There's a certain choreography to it now, tying the same boot first, folding your map exactly the same way, tapping the nose of the plane twice with your right hand before climbing in. It doesn't make sense, but then again, it doesn't have to. You've long since stopped looking for logic here. The idea of superstition in military aviation might sound like nonsense to someone reading about it later in a textbook. But in the air, superstition is as much a part of the cockpit as the altimeter. It fills the spaces between procedures, between the checklists and the countdowns and the metallic clinks of preparation. You remember a pilot named Fields always wore his mother's engagement ring on a chain around his neck. Not for romance. Not even for her. But because she had survived 3 car accidents and an electrical fire. That ring's got 9 lives, he used to say. I'm just hitching a few. Some guys recited parts of baseball broadcasts. Others wore socks inside out. One guy refused to shave on mission days. Said the whiskers threw off flack. It was nonsense. He knew it was nonsense. But it was also tradition. Ritual. And that's what mattered. Historians still argue whether this ritualistic behavior bordered on obsession. One school of thought paints it as an adaptive behavior in the face of extreme uncertainty, a mental crutch that allowed soldiers to retain a shred of control. Another perspective sees it more cynically, as the military tolerating irrational behavior in exchange for short-term performance boosts. But on the ground, it's much simpler. You find a thing. A phrase. A sock. A pebble. And you decide it means something. Then you let it carry you. Today, there's something different in the hangar. A strange buzz, not the electrical hum of warming engines, but something in the air. You notice it when Jenkins pulls out a tiny carved owl from his duffel. It's wood, about the size of a cigarette lighter, its edges worn smooth by touch. Ghanaian, he says. Traded a pack of Lucky Strikes for it. The guy told me it sees in the dark. No one questions it. The crew next to yours is chalking a new phrase onto the side of their bomber. It's a poem this time, lines in shaky cursive. Though clouds may hide the sky from view, this coin will carry me home to you. It's accompanied by a silver coin taped beside the navigator's window. Probably worthless. Probably priceless. And then there's Ellis, the guy from Boston, fiddling nervously with a harmonica. He never plays it. Just holds it, runs his thumb along the edge. His brother gave it to him before shipping out to the Pacific. If it whistles, I'm not going, he says every time. It never whistles. But he still asks it. On your plane, things are more subtle. You've noticed that the gunner always turns his belt buckle 3 times before boarding. The radio operator leaves a scrap of paper on the instrument panel with his grandmother's name on it. You don't even know if she's alive or not. Doesn't matter. It's there every time. There's a language to these gestures, silent but universally understood. Even the gruffest, most cynical crew chiefs, the ones who curse and spit and mock every officer in sight, even they have their rituals. One you know keeps a feather tucked into the band of his cap. When asked, he says it's from the wing of a goose that once tried to kill me. He grins when he says it, but you can tell it matters. You start to notice how communal these charms become. There's a gunner who always carries a photo of Rita Hayworth. Not his photo, mind you, he found it taped in a locker when he arrived. Now it lives in his flight vest. Everyone touches it before takeoff. It's become a kind of squad mascot. She's smiling in that same knowing way in every frame. Maybe that's the real magic. Of course, some people try to cheat the system. Like Morris, he once tried to wear 6 different charms at once: a St. Christopher medallion, a silk square from a parachute, a tiny bell, a photo of his cousin's bar mitzvah, a British halfpenny, and someone else's dog tag. On his next mission, they lost an engine midair and had to ditch in a field. He blamed the overload. Too much mojo, he muttered afterward, limping back with a torn flight suit and a new respect for charm moderation. So you learn, as others have, that one charm is enough. But it has to be the right one. You remember hearing about the French resistance pilots who carried poems in invisible ink, pressed between the pages of small field manuals. Or the Polish bomber crews who painted tiny dots beneath their lapels, just over their hearts. No one ever explained why. It didn't need explaining. In one British squadron, the officers carried what they called last letters, sealed notes written after their first mission and kept unopened in their breast pockets. A few read them once and tucked them away. Others rewrote theirs every week. The point wasn't the content, it was the act of believing it might one day be read. Sometimes the charm wasn't an object, but a person. There's the tale of Button Boy, a young mechanic so reliable and fast with field repairs that entire crews began requesting him by name, not for his skill, but for his luck aura. They'd bribe him with sweets and smokes just to sit in the cockpit for 60 seconds before liftoff. When he was reassigned, morale dipped for weeks. Eventually, they flew him back in, just to touch the yoke before a bombing run. That's how far the belief goes. You even once heard of a navigator who claimed the wind followed him. Called it Mary, after an old girlfriend. If a storm cropped up, he'd whisper at the sky, "Come on, Mary, don't be like that." According to legend, Mary always listened. Or maybe he was just lucky. Maybe you're all just lucky. Or maybe, luck's just the polite name you give to fear wearing a pretty dress. Still, no one dares test it. The old saying goes, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, there are no skeptics in bomber bays, either. Not when the flak starts. Tonight, as you gear up, you run your thumb along the pencil again. And for a moment, you remember that girl at the station. The one who smiled without needing a reason. The one who handed you something ordinary that has now become sacred. You smile. You touch the pencil once more. And then you go to war. The engines roar before they even roll, coughing to life in sequence. It's a sound you've heard 100 times now, and still, it climbs right into your spine like a cold finger tapping vertebrae. You're used to it, sure, but used to isn't the same as at ease. You climb aboard as you always do, ducking instinctively at the same spot in the fuselage, brushing your hand against the same rivet with the chip paint, your own private checkpoint. You don't say anything about it. You just do it. It's as much a part of flight prep now as the safety harness or the oxygen check. As you settle into your seat, you look around at your crewmates. You know what's in each of their pockets. Not the boring stuff, maps, rations, flares. You mean the real things. Talismans, tokens, whispers of safety tucked inside folds of wool or wrapped in oilskin and string. The tail gunner, Sweetwater, has his mission marble, a cloudy green cat's eye from a schoolyard long since bombed into ash. He rubs it between thumb and forefinger before every takeoff. If it drops, he won't fly. Hasn't happened yet. He keeps it in a small tin next to his chewing gum and a photo of his baby sister, all gaptered grin and pigtails. You know that because he showed you once, eyes glassy with nerves. I think she's the one keeping me up there, he whispered, like the thought itself might jinx it. Another pilot in your squadron carries a music box. Not for music, it doesn't even work anymore. But he wins it anyway. It squeaks and skips, and every time it fails to play a tune, he smiles. Means the bad luck's already spent, he explains, like that logic holds the sky in place. You might laugh. But only quietly. Because you, too, have your thing. In your flight jacket, the pencil sits still. You've started believing it changes temperature. Warmer on good days. Cooler when something's off. It's silly. It's essential. It's both. Welcome to war. Outside, the ground crew waves the chalkboard, target coordinates scrawled in fat, efficient handwriting. You squint. You recognize the grid reference. This one's familiar. Familiar doesn't mean safe. You think back to older pilots, the ones with more missions than toes. They're the true believers. You remember a guy named Nash who carried a bullet that once grazed his temple. This one already had my name on it, he used to say, flicking it like a coin. The universe doesn't get two. He lasted through 45 missions. Then caught pneumonia and was reassigned to desk duty. Some of them do make it out. But always with ghosts in their pockets. There's a running joke among the aircrews that the more charms you carry, the closer you are to cracking. It's whispered with a smirk, but everyone knows it hides a kernel of truth. When a guy starts painting crosses on the ceiling or talking to his boots like they're old friends, that's when the CO starts watching. Still, no one judges. Not really. Because even the flight manuals quietly allow space for irrationality. Case in point, in some airbases, chaplains were issued blessing kits. They tore the hangars before missions, sprinkling planes with holy water. Protestant, Catholic, didn't matter. The crew swore it helped. Even the agnostics lined up. Some historians call this a morale tactic. Others suggest it was superstition dressed in clergy robes. Either way, it worked. At one base in Italy, there was a rumor that a local cat, scrawny, half-blind, and mean as vinegar, had become a sort of squadron mascot. They called him Giovanni. If Giovanni curled up under your plane before takeoff, it was good luck. If he hissed and left, you might want to pretend you'd caught a cold. No one knew who first said it, but soon Giovanni's presence became protocol. One pilot tried bribing him with sardines. Another wrote a letter home asking for a box of toy mice, for tactical feline coaxing. The military, to its credit, never interfered. Of course, not every charm came from whimsy or folklore. Some were born from tragedy. You once heard about a navigator named Lenz who wore a woman's perfume dabbed on his scarf. Not because he was sentimental, but because his previous crew had perished in a crash, and that scarf was all he'd found at the scene. The scent stuck. He never spoke of it. But if he flew without it, he shook. Literally shook. Hands like a jackhammer. So he wore the scent of loss. And let it carry him forward. You might think that these stories belong in museums or memoirs. That they were isolated, colorful flukes in an otherwise buttoned-up military operation. But here's the truth, luck was policy. Informal, sure. But policy nonetheless. Some airbases had bulletin boards just for charms, swaps, found items, photos. One particularly crowded board had a hand-painted sign, tokens and totems, leave one, take one, believe as needed. It was never empty. One crew from Arkansas stitched quilt squares into their parachutes. Each square came from a family member's shirt or apron back home. They swore it made the silk softer. When one of them bailed out and survived a particularly bad descent, he claimed it was Aunt Mabel's pot roast square that cushioned the fall. No one argued. There's also the tale of a Canadian pilot who carried a potato. That's it. A plain Yukon Gold. Said it reminded him of home. Of dinner. Of something solid and unbreakable. He replaced it every few weeks but always kept one in his vest pocket. Starch for the soul, he joked. The crew loved it. They'd rub the potato before missions like it was Aladdin's lamp. Eventually, someone carved a face into one and named it Captain Spud. It flew 5 missions. Got a mini flight cap and everything. You can't make this stuff up. Except someone probably did. Then someone else believed it. And suddenly, it was true. It's funny how a charm, something you never meant to keep, becomes the center of your ritual. You once overheard a guy say, "It's not about whether the charm saves me. It's about whether I forget to bring it and then something bad happens." And that's it, isn't it? The fear of forgetting. Forgetting the sock, the marble, the whisper, the pencil. And with it, forgetting the fragile sense of order you've built for yourself in the chaos of war. Because if you forget it, and you go down, people will say, "Well, of course. He didn't have the thing." And in a strange, sleepy way, that logic brings comfort. Better the universe has rules, even arbitrary ones, than none at all. So tonight, as the wheels lift from the runway, and the engines vibrate through your boots, you check your pocket. Still there. Still warm. Still yours. You don't smile. You don't need to. You just fly. It's pre-dawn again, and the barracks are starting to hum. You're awake before the bugle this time, eyes staring into the pale ceiling, heart pacing itself like it knows something's coming. The pencil in your jacket is still there. You touch it through the fabric. Just to be sure. Across the aisle, one of the rookies is practicing his pre-flight ritual. He's muttering the same 7 words under his breath. Over and over. You've heard it for days now, just before every mission, as he laces his boots, "My uncle flew and made it home." That's it. No elaborate tokens, no rabbit's foot. Just a sentence. A charm in sound. This morning is quieter than most. It's foggy, the kind of haze that makes everything seem muffled and close, like the world is hiding under a blanket. The silence draws out small rituals in everyone. There's a certain choreography to it now, tying the same boot first, folding your map exactly the same way, tapping the nose of the plane twice with your right hand before climbing in. It doesn't make sense, but then again, it doesn't have to. You've long since stopped looking for logic here. The idea of superstition in military aviation might sound like nonsense to someone reading about it later in a textbook. But in the air, superstition is as much a part of the cockpit as the altimeter. It fills the spaces between procedures, between the checklists and the countdowns and the metallic clinks of preparation. You remember a pilot named Fields always wore his mother's engagement ring on a chain around his neck. Not for romance. Not even for her. But because she had survived 3 car accidents and an electrical fire. "That ring's got 9 lives," he used to say. "I'm just hitching a few." Some guys recited parts of baseball broadcasts. Others wore socks inside out. One guy refused to shave on mission days. Said the whiskers threw off flack. It was nonsense. He knew it was nonsense. But it was also tradition. Ritual. And that's what mattered. Historians still argue whether this ritualistic behavior bordered on obsession. One school of thought paints it as an adaptive behavior in the face of extreme uncertainty, a mental crutch that allowed soldiers to retain a shred of control. Another perspective sees it more cynically, as the military tolerating irrational behavior in exchange for short-term performance boosts. But on the ground, it's much simpler. You find a thing. A phrase. A sock. A pebble. And you decide it means something. Then you let it carry you. Today, there's something different in the hangar. A strange buzz, not the electrical hum of warming engines, but something in the air. You notice it when Jenkins pulls out a tiny carved owl from his duffel. It's wood, about the size of a cigarette lighter, its edges worn smooth by touch. Ghanaian, he says. Traded a pack of Lucky Strikes for it. The guy told me it sees in the dark. No one questions it. The crew next to yours is chalking a new phrase onto the side of their bomber. It's a poem this time, lines in shaky cursive. Though clouds may hide the sky from view, this coin will carry me home to you. It's accompanied by a silver coin taped beside the navigator's window. Probably worthless. Probably priceless. And then there's Ellis, the guy from Boston, fiddling nervously with a harmonica. He never plays it. Just holds it, runs his thumb along the edge. His brother gave it to him before shipping out to the Pacific. If it whistles, I'm not going, he says every time. It never whistles. But he still asks it. On your plane, things are more subtle. You've noticed that the gunner always turns his belt buckle 3 times before boarding. The radio operator leaves a scrap of paper on the instrument panel with his grandmother's name on it. You don't even know if she's alive or not. Doesn't matter. It's there every time. There's a language to these gestures, silent but universally understood. Even the gruffest, most cynical crew chiefs, the ones who curse and spit and mock every officer in sight, even they have their rituals. One you know keeps a feather tucked into the band of his cap. When asked, he says it's from the wing of a goose that once tried to kill me. He grins when he says it, but you can tell, it matters. You start to notice how communal these charms become. There's a gunner who always carries a photo of Rita Hayworth. Not his photo, mind you, he found it taped in a locker when he arrived. Now it lives in his flight vest. Everyone touches it before takeoff. It's become a kind of squad mascot. She's smiling in that same knowing way in every frame. Maybe that's the real magic. Of course, some people try to cheat the system. Like Morris, he once tried to wear 6 different charms at once: a St. Christopher medallion, a silk square from a parachute, a tiny bell, a photo of his cousin's bar mitzvah, a British halfpenny, and someone else's dog tag. On his next mission, they lost an engine midair and had to ditch in a field. He blamed the overload. Too much mojo, he muttered afterward, limping back with a torn flight suit and a new respect for charm moderation. So you learn, as others have, that one charm is enough. But it has to be the right one. You remember hearing about the French resistance pilots who carried poems in invisible ink, pressed between the pages of small field manuals. Or the Polish bomber crews who painted tiny dots beneath their lapels, just over their hearts. No one ever explained why. It didn't need explaining. In one British squadron, the officers carried what they called last letters, sealed notes written after their first mission and kept unopened in their breast pockets. A few read them once and tucked them away. Others rewrote theirs every week. The point wasn't the content, it was the act of believing it might one day be read. Sometimes the charm wasn't an object, but a person. There's the tale of Button Boy, a young mechanic so reliable and fast with field repairs that entire crews began requesting him by name, not for his skill, but for his luck aura. They'd bribe him with sweets and smokes just to sit in the cockpit for 60 seconds before liftoff. When he was reassigned, morale dipped for weeks. Eventually, they flew him back in, just to touch the yoke before a bombing run. That's how far the belief goes. You even once heard of a navigator who claimed the wind followed him. Called it Mary, after an old girlfriend. If a storm cropped up, he'd whisper at the sky, "Come on, Mary, don't be like that." According to legend, Mary always listened. Or maybe he was just lucky. Maybe you're all just lucky. Or maybe, luck's just the polite name you give to fear wearing a pretty dress. Still, no one dares test it. The old saying goes, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, there are no skeptics in bomber bays, either. Not when the flak starts. Tonight, as you gear up, you run your thumb along the pencil again. And for a moment, you remember that girl at the station. The one who smiled without needing a reason. The one who handed you something ordinary that has now become sacred. You smile. You touch the pencil once more. And then you go to war. The engines roar before they even roll, coughing to life in sequence. It's a sound you've heard 100 times now, and still, it climbs right into your spine like a cold finger tapping vertebrae. You're used to it, sure, but used to isn't the same as at ease. You climb aboard as you always do, ducking instinctively at the same spot in the fuselage, brushing your hand against the same rivet with the chip paint, your own private checkpoint. You don't say anything about it. You just do it. It's as much a part of flight prep now as the safety harness or the oxygen check. As you settle into your seat, you look around at your crewmates. You know what's in each of their pockets. Not the boring stuff, maps, rations, flares. You mean the real things. Talismans, tokens, whispers of safety tucked inside folds of wool or wrapped in oilskin and string. The tail gunner, Sweetwater, has his mission marble, a cloudy green cat's eye from a schoolyard long since bombed into ash. He rubs it between thumb and forefinger before every takeoff. If it drops, he won't fly. Hasn't happened yet. He keeps it in a small tin next to his chewing gum and a photo of his baby sister, all gapped grin and pigtails. You know that because he showed you once, eyes glassy with nerves. I think she's the one keeping me up there, he whispered, like the thought itself might jinx it. Another pilot in your squadron carries a music box. Not for music, it doesn't even work anymore. But he wins it anyway. It squeaks and skips, and every time it fails to play a tune, he smiles. Means the bad luck's already spent, he explains, like that logic holds the sky in place. You might laugh. But only quietly. Because you, too, have your thing. In your flight jacket, the pencil sits still. You've started believing it changes temperature. Warmer on good days. Cooler when something's off. It's silly. It's essential. It's both. Welcome to war. Outside, the ground crew waves the chalkboard, target coordinates scrawled in fat, efficient handwriting. You squint. You recognize the grid reference. This one's familiar. Familiar doesn't mean safe. You think back to older pilots, the ones with more missions than toes. They're the true believers. You remember a guy named Nash who carried a bullet that once grazed his temple. This one already had my name on it, he used to say, flicking it like a coin. The universe doesn't get two. He lasted through 45 missions. Then caught pneumonia and was reassigned to desk duty. Some of them do make it out. But always with ghosts in their pockets. There's a running joke among the aircrews that the more charms you carry, the closer you are to cracking. It's whispered with a smirk, but everyone knows it hides a kernel of truth. When a guy starts painting crosses on the ceiling or talking to his boots like they're old friends, that's when the CO starts watching. Still, no one judges. Not really. Because even the flight manuals quietly allow space for irrationality. Case in point, in some airbases, chaplains were issued blessing kits. They tore the hangars before missions, sprinkling planes with holy water. Protestant, Catholic, didn't matter. The crew swore it helped. Even the agnostics lined up. Some historians call this a morale tactic. Others suggest it was superstition dressed in clergy robes. Either way, it worked. At one base in Italy, there was a rumor that a local cat, scrawny, half-blind, and mean as vinegar, had become a sort of squadron mascot. They called him Giovanni. If Giovanni curled up under your plane before takeoff, it was good luck. If he hissed and left, you might want to pretend you'd caught a cold. No one knew who first said it, but soon Giovanni's presence became protocol. One pilot tried bribing him with sardines. Another wrote a letter home asking for a box of toy mice, for tactical feline coaxing. The military, to its credit, never interfered. Of course, not every charm came from whimsy or folklore. Some were born from tragedy. You once heard about a navigator named Lenz who wore a woman's perfume dabbed on his scarf. Not because he was sentimental, but because his previous crew had perished in a crash, and that scarf was all he'd found at the scene. the scent stuck. He never spoke of it. But if he flew without it, he shook. Literally shook. Hands like a jackhammer. So he wore the scent of loss. And let it carry him forward. You might think that these stories belong in museums or memoirs. That they were isolated, colorful flukes in an otherwise buttoned-up military operation. But here's the truth, luck was policy. Informal, sure. But policy nonetheless. Some airbases had bulletin boards just for charms, swaps, found items, photos. One particularly crowded board had a hand-painted sign, tokens and totems, leave one, take one, believe as needed. It was never empty. One crew from Arkansas stitched quilt squares into their parachutes. Each square came from a family member's shirt or apron back home. They swore it made the silk softer. When one of them bailed out and survived a particularly bad descent, he claimed it was Aunt Mabel's pot roast square that cushioned the fall. No one argued. There's also the tale of a Canadian pilot who carried a potato. That's it. A plain Yukon Gold. Said it reminded him of home. Of dinner. Of something solid and unbreakable. He replaced it every few weeks but always kept one in his vest pocket. Starch for the soul, he joked. The crew loved it. They'd rub the potato before missions like it was Aladdin's lamp. Eventually, someone carved a face into one and named it Captain Spud. It flew 5 missions. Got a mini flight cap and everything. You can't make this stuff up. Except someone probably did. Then someone else believed it. And suddenly, it was true. It's funny how a charm, something you never meant to keep, becomes the center of your ritual. You once overheard a guy say, "It's not about whether the charm saves me. It's about whether I forget to bring it, and then something bad happens." And that's it, isn't it? The fear of forgetting. Forgetting the sock, the marble, the whisper, the pencil. And with it, forgetting the fragile sense of order you've built for yourself in the chaos of war. Because if you forget it, and you go down, people will say, well, of course. He didn't have the thing. And in a strange, sleepy way, that logic brings comfort. Better the universe has rules, even arbitrary ones, than none at all. So tonight, as the wheels lift from the runway, and the engines vibrate through your boots, you check your pocket. Still there. Still warm. Still yours. You don't smile. You don't need to. You just fly. You wake up long before the sun, your bunk creaking under you like an old ship hull groaning at sea. It's not nerves. It's routine. You've trained your body to rise with the pre-dawn whispers. In that half-light stillness, the world feels like it's holding its breath. Your boots hit the floor with a familiar thud, the chill of the morning seeping through the soles. Outside the barracks, the mess hall lights blink on one by one, golden puddles in the blue-grey dark. You trudge toward them, still groggy, and the coffee is already strong enough to strip paint. Everyone's quiet. Not solemn, just saving energy. Each man clutches his own silence like a personal relic. Conversations, when they happen, are soft and fragmented. Last night's card game, the guy who got his shipment of socks, the chocolate bar that mysteriously disappeared. But occasionally, someone brings up luck. Like it's a real thing. Sholden TV used my rabbit's foot last night, you hear someone mutter behind a steel mug. Wasted it on poker. A few chuckles. A few wary glances. Everyone has a line they don't cross. Breakfast is powdered eggs and something passing as toast. No one complains. You're all too busy watching the chaplain work his way down the runway. He's doing the rounds again, little drops of holy water, some murmured Latin, and a well-practiced nod. He doesn't need a list. He knows which crews want the ritual, and which ones don't. Yours always does. You've seen more than a few skeptics fold under the pressure. One kid from Jersey used to scoff at the idea. Called it priest pageantry. Then he caught a bad engine fire over the channel. Barely made it back. The next morning, he showed up with a St. Christopher medal on a chain and asked the chaplain to give it to the double dose. No one laughed. Because no one thought it was funny. The mythology around aircrew luck started early in the war, and by now, it's become its own kind of sacred science. Every base has its own version. Some swear by lucky socks. Others believe in ritual phrases before takeoff. You've heard of one British crew that sang the same hymn, "Abide with me," every time they taxied. Off-key. Out of sync. Sacred. And here's the odd part, military brass rarely interfered. They knew morale when they saw it. At an airbase in the Pacific, the commanding officer actually posted a sign on the hangar doors, "No charm, no fly." Tongue-in-cheek? Sure. But no one tested it. You remember reading a flyer someone had taped in the latrine, half-peeled and water-stained. It listed the top 10 most trusted charms of 1943. Half were traditional, clovers, lucky coins, dog tags rubbed smooth by nervous fingers. The rest were pure chaos, a spoon from a mess kit, a melted crayon, a chess pawn carved from soap. Someone had added, in pencil, #11, the sock I haven't washed since North Africa. That sock, by the way, was very real. You know, because it once ended up in your laundry by mistake. The owner nearly tackled you. You returned it. Apologies were exchanged. You never touched another sock without checking for initials again. The belief systems grew elaborate. Like one pilot who swore his charm had to be recharged by moonlight. So every full moon, he'd place it on the windowsill of the barracks. A small tin compass, the kind that didn't even point north anymore. But it didn't matter. Direction wasn't the point. Intention was. And then there were the rookies. Oh, the rookies. Bright-eyed, fresh from training, and charmless. They looked around like tourists in a temple, unsure of what to believe. Some resisted the whole idea. Others dove in, desperate to find their thing. You'd watch them scavenge old lockers, dig through crates, ask veterans what to carry. One kid tried using a peanut. Just a single peanut. He drew a face on it. Named it Flighty. Talked to it before missions. Protected it like it was a diamond. It cracked in his vest pocket on mission 4. He cried. Not from the mission. From the peanut. We helped him find another one. By week's end, Flighty 2 was airborne. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were just psychological coping mechanisms or genuine belief systems that filled a gap left by traditional military structures. But down here, on the ground, and up there, in the cold, burning blue, nobody cared what the textbooks thought. It worked if you thought it worked. And if it didn't, well, maybe your charm wasn't calibrated right. One of the quietest crewmen in your squadron carried an ivory domino. A double 3. Found it under his bunk the day before his first flight. He said nothing about it. Just held it between his palms, eyes shut, every time the engine started. You asked him once why he kept it. He simply shrugged and said, "Because I came back." There's no arguing with that. Another guy, McLaren, a Scotsman with a drawl thick as butter, carried a small book of poetry by Robert Burns. He never opened it. Just kept it in his thigh pocket, dog-eared and warped from sweat. He rhymed me through the war, he claimed. Never mind, he couldn't recite a single stanza. That wasn't the point. One American pilot taped a pencil sketch of his dog, Buster, to the cockpit wall. Nothing unusual there, until you noticed the drawing changed slightly before every mission. Turns out, he'd redraw Buster each time, new pose, new expression, same dog. When asked why, he said, "Gotta make sure he's awake when I fly." There's something beautiful in that. An unspoken agreement between man and imagination. Even crash survivors clung to this logic. A B-17 radio operator once survived a harrowing descent by clinging to a toy yo-yo. He swore the centrifugal force balanced the vibes. Years later, he still had that yo-yo. Never played with it again. just kept it in a showbox marked flight gear. The stories never stopped. There was the pilot who only flew with mint chewing gum, no other flavor. The bombardier who tied a single hair from his wife's comb around his finger. The gunner who painted a tiny pineapple on every bullet belt. You started noticing the way these tokens stitched people together. A secret fraternity of fear, hope, and ritual. You began to spot the signs, a hand lingering in a pocket too long, a look of panic when something's left on a bunk, a quiet word with the chaplain not for guidance, but for insurance. It's not just objects, either. Sometimes the charm is an action. You knew a guy who always whistled one specific tune while loading the plane. A little jazz riff from home. One day, he forgot. They had a rough flight, engine trouble, flak, a landing gear issue. He blamed the song. From then on, he whistled it twice. One pilot you knew insisted on touching every crew member's shoulder right before the cockpit hatch closed. He didn't explain. He just did it. And if he missed someone, he made them come back for the tap. Reset the spell, he'd mutter. No one argued. In some way, these rituals gave you control. In a world where flak could shatter steel and invisible bursts of wind could stall engines, your little token, be it a spoon, a sock, or a domino, was the one thing you had say over. So as you walk to the plane now, charm tucked safely where it always goes, you nod to the chaplain, offer a half-smile to Giovanni the cat, who's sitting under someone else's tail today, and trace your finger along the same scratched panel by the hatch. You pause. Just a second longer than usual. And then step aboard. Because no matter how much training you've had, no matter how much logic, science, or protocol surrounds you, there's always room for belief. And today, you believe in the pencil. The engines are already rumbling as you settle into your seat, the vibrations climbing up through the metal and into your bones like a tuning fork. You feel your lucky charm shift slightly, still there, still tucked into the inner lining of your flight jacket. You pat it. Just once. It's not habit anymore. It's doctrine. As the crew checks instruments and yells their pre-flight calls over the headsets, you look around the cockpit with practiced calm. Everything is exactly where it should be. Everything and everyone. Except Johnson. Tail gunner. He's late. Where's lucky legs? Someone quips over the radio, referring to Johnson's superstition that he had to slap the tail wheel twice before every flight. Maybe he's recharging. Before anyone else can laugh, he's spotted sprinting toward the plane, boots pounding, helmet askew, waving a metal lunch tin in one hand like a madman. You all groan in relief. He climbs aboard, out of breath but grinning. Forgot Bessie, he wheezes, holding up the tin. Inside is not a sandwich. Not even rations. Inside is a small, cloth cow. Spotted. Smiling. Stuffed with sawdust. Bessie's been on every flight Johnson's taken, tucked into the little shelf near his gun sight. No Bessie, no boom boom. It's that simple. Once she's in place, and Johnson strapped in, the plane begins to roll. You feel that creeping sense of anticipation rise, not sharp and sudden like it used to be, but slow, like the tide. You don't dread it anymore. You respect it. As the wheels leave the ground, the world falls away. The base, the rows of tents, the chaplain's cross, the control tower all sink beneath the cloud line, and you're left in the high silence of sky and steel. You glance down at your charm again. Not because you think you need it, exactly. Because you don't dare not. Once airborne, the crew slips into rhythm. The navigator charts and scribbles. The bombardier hums something that might be Sinatra. Johnson gives Bessie a casual pat every 10 minutes like a baseball coach soothing his best pitcher. And then there's Sparks, your radio man, who insists on tapping Morse code messages with his pinky ring. He swears it's his mother's, passed down during the Depression. The message always begins with the same nonsense line, mangoes taste better when left alone. It's a code, supposedly, for come back safe. Totally invented. Entirely effective. But today's mission has a wrinkle. Today, you're flying with a guest. War correspondent. British. One of those well-dressed, perpetually curious types who seems more intrigued by the crew's sock superstition than the fact that flak can tear a plane in half. He's asking questions as the engines drone. So these charms, they really work, do they? Sparks chuckles into the headset. No, mate. They don't work. But they don't not work either. The correspondent jots that down in his little notebook like he's just been handed the meaning of life. He looks at you next. What's yours? You shrug. It's complicated. And it is. Because yours isn't an object. Not really. It's a sequence. A silent counting pattern you do with your fingers during takeoff. Thumb to pinky. Pinky to ring. Ring to middle. Once up. Once down. 5 times. You've done it every flight. You don't remember why you started. You only remember that the one time you skipped it, you ended up circling an airfield in heavy fog for 3 hours. Coincidence? Sure. But never again. The British correspondent is scribbling frantically. You wonder if he'll mention the nose art on the side of your plane. A half-faded pin-up girl holding a lucky horseshoe. Beneath her, Lady Probability. Painted during the early days of the war by a now-retired mechanic named Gutierrez, who used to keep a pocket full of sugar cubes for air spirits. Not for the crew. Not even for animals. Just air spirits. Feed the sky, he used to say. No one laughed. Not then. Speaking of which, over the radio, another pilot mentions his plane just hit 50 missions. That's the golden number for some squadrons. After 50, you're rotated home. Others say 25. Still others claim it's a lie, that if you can walk, you fly. But hitting a big milestone like that? You always bring your extra lucky charm. One gunner, you remember, brought 2 wedding rings on mission 25. His and his wife's. He taped hers inside his helmet. Said it gave him better radar. Historians still argue whether these charming behaviors evolved organically or were passively encouraged by leadership to keep morale high. But there's no denying that entire units developed shared rituals. Like the 381st Bomb Group, whose crews walked counterclockwise around their planes before boarding. Or the Lucky Sevens of the Pacific, who played a hand of poker with imaginary cards before takeoff, no cards, just air, and dealt new hands before each mission. One day, a new recruit dealt a royal flush. Everyone gasped. The flight went flawlessly. The next week, he got 3 jacks. The engine caught fire. After that, they made him deal bad hands on purpose. And you know what? It worked. Every time. The deeper you dive into this airborne folklore, the more absurd and specific it becomes. The pilot who kept a stick of chewing gum from his first mission never chewed. Wrapped it, re-wrapped it, called it the Sentinel. The tail gunner who recited baseball stats to calm himself before flak runs. The bombardier who prayed not to a god, but to his childhood goldfish, Milton. We all believed in something. Or pretended not to, but still checked the left sock before the right, just in case. And now, in this moment, your plane banks gently toward the coast. Beneath you, the clouds curl like ocean foam. You know the routine. In less than 30 minutes, you'll be over enemy territory. But right now, this is the pocket of peace before the storm. You reach down, press your charm again. Spark sends his usual Morse. Bessie blinks in the sun. Even the British correspondent has gone quiet, looking out the window as if he's just now grasping how small everything is from up here. How fragile. And how much faith we put in tiny things. As if luck were a rope we all hold onto, tied around some ancient post at the center of the world. Tug too hard, it slips. Hold gently, it stays. Any last thoughts before we reach target? He asks into his notepad. You smile. Just a little. Yeah, you say. Tell your readers the rabbit's foot didn't work. He pauses. Because it wasn't lucky. No, you say, checking the straps one more time, because it wasn't the rabbit's. You know the flak's coming before you see it. It's a sixth sense at this point, like the way your hand knows to flinch before the stovetop even glows red. Your stomach tightens. The sky changes. Not in color, but in pressure. As if the clouds are holding their breath. Then, there it is. Black blooms in the sky. Puffs of smoke curling like burnt petals, scattered at odd, deliberate intervals. It's not random. Not really. You've learned to read their spacing. Their rhythm. The Germans call it Flugabwurkenon. You just call it flak. And even though it's designed to destroy machines, it has a habit of aiming for minds. This is where the Lucky Charms truly shine. Johnson clutches Bessie harder. Sparks taps his Morse code with quickened rhythm. The pilot, you, do the finger sequence twice as fast, not even noticing until it's done. And then, amid the noise, you remember something, the legend of Tin-Nose Ted. He flew out of the 306th Bomb Group. Supposedly took a direct flak hit on his nose cone, blew clean through, and kept flying with a chunk of metal jammed in his flight suit. Refused medical attention until after landing. Said the metals was cooling his nerves. A story like that spreads fast. Soon, bits of flak became lucky. Crews would pocket shrapnel from their own planes, tokens of survival. One gunner tied a jagged sliver to his bootlace. Another crew embedded it into a homemade necklace and called it the shard. Now here you are, dodging the very stuff people end up treasuring. The irony doesn't escape you. The British correspondent is pale now. Less scribbling, more staring. He mutters, "You all do this daily." Sparks chuckles. Only on the days ending in Y. Outside the window, a nearby bomber jerks upward, hit. No smoke. Might be evasive action. Might be panic. You've learned not to guess. You just breathe. Count. Tap. And you talk. Because talking helps. That's why stories bloom in these cockpits. Stories of phantom planes that appear mid-mission, never land. Of pilots who dreamed of crashes, then stayed home the next day. Of one guy who always wore a green sock on his right foot, and when he switched them accidentally, his oxygen line froze mid-flight. Historians still argue whether these myths served psychological purposes or were simply the byproduct of isolation your training manual once read. You argue they were necessary. Without stories, this becomes just metal and math. Targets and maps. Life and death. With stories, there's shape. Meaning. Even beauty. Like the ball turret gunner who believed in a guardian angel named Wendell, who lived in the spinning gear housing and protected him from jams. He even gave Wendell a birthday, May 2nd, and left him a piece of chocolate every mission. Did Wendell exist? Well, the gun never jammed. The flak eases as you near the drop zone. The plane levels. Johnson lets out a low whistle. He taps Bessie. Twice. She stares back with sawdust serenity. 5 minutes, says the pilot. You feel your charm again, warm now from your hand. Bombardier's up. I squinting. One hand on the scope, the other brushing a folded photograph tucked into the lining of his vest. A girl with hair curled just right. He's got 3 copies, one for his wallet, one for luck, one for backup luck. It helps to double up. And now, the bombs are gone. Released. Sailing downward like mechanical confessions. The plane lifts slightly, lighter, freer. It's always surreal, how something so loud can bring such silence. You all watch the sky around you, expecting retaliation. Instead, you get rain. Soft, harmless. It hits the windows with delicate taps, whispering like leaves. And for a minute, just a minute, everything feels normal. That's when someone over the radio tells the story of the penny plane. It's half joke, half religion. Apparently, a crew out of England glued a single penny to their dashboard before every mission. The theory, as long as the penny remained untouched, the plane would return. The problem? It was the same penny. Passed from crew to crew. They'd wait to see who made it back, then borrow it for their next run. Eventually, the penny vanished. A scandal. Rumor says it's buried in a hangar floor under a loose tile. Others say it was melted down and used in a commemorative plaque. You hope it's still out there. Tucked into someone's sock, maybe. You think about your own charm again. How one day, it won't be yours anymore. And how someone else might carry it. The return trip is smooth. No chatter. No jokes. Everyone's watching the horizon. The sun's angling low now. The sky has that golden hush to it, like an old photograph that's starting to fade. Your co-pilot hums "I'll be seeing you" under his breath. It's off-key but strangely beautiful. You glance around the cockpit. This moment right here, is what the charms are really for. Not protection. Memory. Because when you're flying, time blurs. You need anchors. You need to remember that you were here, in this exact sky, with these exact people, feeling this exact weight in your chest. And you'll need it again. Later, when you're on the ground. When someone's missing. When the letter arrives. When the whiskey burns too fast. You'll take out the charm, whatever it is, and it'll pull you back to now. To the flight that ended with a sunset and a lucky cow. Final approach, says the pilot. You descend into familiar airspace. The base appears below like a childhood home in a dream. Squat buildings. Tiny trucks. Lines of men and smoke. You could trace every path with your eyes closed. As you land, the wheels kiss the runway with a jolt. Nothing breaks. Nothing explodes. Johnson lets out a breath that sounds like a laugh and a prayer at once. And for the first time today, you realize your fingers are still doing the tapping sequence. Even now. Especially now. You taxi to a halt. The engines spin down like sleepy giants, and the silence creeps in. Someone opens the hatch. Cool air. Earth smell. Boots on tarmac. You reach into your jacket and pull out your charm. Hold it up to the dying light. It's small. A bit worn now. But whole. Just like you. Back on solid ground, your legs feel like they're made of pudding and pipe cleaners. The strange part is, they always do. No matter how many times you fly, each return feels like your first wobble down a gangplank. There's no grace to it. Just gravity and gratitude. Someone on the crew mutters, "Kiss the tarmac, boys." You all half laugh, but no one actually bends down. That's more for first-timers or lucky drunks. Instead, you file out slowly, each of you in your own world, the plane behind you steaming like a war-weary dragon. There's a ritual that follows landing. Not official, but every squadron has its flavor. Yours includes checking in with the ground crew, a cup of watery coffee, and, if you're lucky, some half-stale biscuits in the debriefing tent. Someone might write a letter home. Someone else might scribble a tally mark on the side of their plane. Some just stare at a wall for 10 solid minutes. But before all that, you visit the shrine. Not a real shrine. That'd be weird. Just a plywood board nailed beside the briefing hut, painted in olive green and rimmed with scratches. But on it? Tacked, taped, stitched, and stuck, lucky charms of every kind. A melted playing card. A chewed-up fountain pen. A St. Christopher medal with no chain. A domino with its pips sanded off. A toy soldier missing its head. It's a retirement home for magic. When a crew finishes their tour, or loses someone, they sometimes leave their charm behind. Not everyone. But enough to make the board hum with quiet power. It's become sacred by accident. You run your fingers along its edge. Someone's added a velvet ribbon with a note for Jack, told you it wasn't that lucky. Dark humor. Standard issue. You consider adding yours, just for a second. But no. Not yet. It hasn't finished its work. Inside the debrief, the heat is swampy. A sergeant reads off forms in the same tone he probably uses for dinner menus. Damage reports, gun jams, coordinates. Someone mentions a jam bomb bay door. Another guy says he saw a plane smoke puffing in formation, might not have made it. No one says the obvious, that you're all here and one guy isn't. The pilot glances at his charm, a brass bullet casing etched with a tiny M. He swears it stands for miracle, though you all know it's his sister's name. She gave it to him before shipping out. Said it came from their grandpa's hunting rifle. It already hit something, she joked. So it won't again. There's no logic to it. But logic never offered anyone comfort. That's the thing with these charms, they're part armor, part anchor. You remember another crew, based out of Sicily. They had a whole crew-wide superstition about a certain brand of chewing gum. Each man got exactly one stick before takeoff, and God help you if you asked for a second. One day, they ran out. Mission got delayed. Plane got reassigned. That aircraft never came back. After that, boxes of gum were smuggled in like treasure. Elsewhere, you'd heard of a BR-17 named Hot Potato whose navigator carried a petrified potato in his helmet bag. Said it came from a ration gone wrong in boot camp and had absorbed all his bad luck. You can't make this stuff up. Well, you can. And they often do. That's part of the charm, no pun intended. Historians still argue whether these habits were superstitious coping mechanisms or communal folklore in motion. But you've lived it. You know that when you're 5 miles above the ground, breathing from a tin can and watching your friend try to fix a jammed gun with his bare fingers in -40 degrees Fahrenheit wind, belief doesn't need a bibliography. It just needs to work. After the debrief, there's downtime. You're technically off duty until the next mission, which could be hours or days depending on weather, orders, and whether someone sneezes near the radar equipment. So, like most, you wander. Base life is weird. Equal parts waiting room and locker room. A whole bunch of men in wool and grease, trying to pass time without going mad. Poker games. Bad ukulele songs. Toothbrush fencing. Letter-writing marathons where the ink smudges from nervous hands. Guys carving initials into mess hall tables like it's detention. That's where you run into Franks. He's with the engineering squad, mostly ground crew. Wears his cap sideways and speaks with a Brooklyn drawl thick enough to stir. He's the unofficial charmsmith of the base. Got an idea for a lucky charm? Franks can solder it, stitch it, etch it, or build it out of scavenged radio parts. He once made a bracelet from bits of a downed Luftwaffe propeller. Gave it to his cousin's squadron. They called it the buzzkill bangle. Franks waves you over, holding something small and shining. Thought you might like this, he says, handing you a coin. It's been sanded smooth on one side and etched with your plane's call letters. You know, he adds, in case you're thinking of a backup charm. Gotta layer up. You smile. Tuck it into your chest pocket. You'll carry it, just in case. Not because you're replacing your old one, but because redundancy is comforting when the odds aren't. Later that night, under a moth-bitten blanket, you listen to someone 2 bunks over tell the story of the Tooth Fairy crew. They flew without issue until a guy lost a molar mid-flight and joked he was cursed. The crew started leaving their own teeth under pillows, real or fake, before each mission. Someone even started crafting tiny notes from the Tooth Fairy, offering good aim and no flak wishes. It went from joke to tradition. The story ends with, and now there's a jar of molars in Hut C. You try to sleep, but your brain drifts to the board again. The shrine. Someday, maybe your charm will hang there. Maybe a new crew will touch it for luck. Maybe they'll invent a story for it. Maybe it'll gain power, the way old things sometimes do, just by enduring. Or maybe, long after this war, someone's grandkid will find it in a drawer and ask, "What's this?" And maybe the answer will be simple. "Oh, that? That kept me alive." Sleep comes in shallow waves. You're not sure how long you're out before the clanging of a mess kit against the doorframe drags you back. Briefing in 10, someone yells, because of course it's briefing in 10. These things always happen like surprise quizzes in school, except the pop quiz can explode. You groan. Sit up. Your charm, still warm from being close to your chest, presses lightly against your ribs. You take that as a good sign. Today's mission is rumored to be a milk run, some say. But you've been at this long enough to know that milk can still curdle midair. Over at the mess, there's toast so dry it doubles as insulation. Someone dunks it in coffee and calls it sky chow. The pilots try not to talk too much. Talking tempts fate. You glance around at the little ritual starting up again. Your tail gunner scratches a tic-tac-toe grid into the table, always starting with an X in the bottom left corner. Your radio man hums a swing tune under his breath, same one every time. Your engineer pulls his socks up twice, once at breakfast, once before the plane. You do what you always do, reach for your charm, run your thumb over its surface, and whisper the words. You've never told anyone what they are. You probably never will. That's part of its power, secrecy. On the way to the aircraft, you pass the bomb loaders. One of them, a lanky guy with the grin of a game show host, has taped a 4-leaf clover onto the side of one of the bombs. It's upside down. Shouldn't that be bad luck? Your co-pilot asks. Nah, the loader shrugs. This way the Germans get the luck. Somewhere, a historian would note this as the dark wartime humor common among ordnance personnel. You just call it Tuesday. You climb back into the bird. Settle into your spot. The cockpit smells like old rubber and tension. And there it is again, on the dashboard, your charm. You taped it their last mission. The coin Franks gave you sits next to it now, like two sentinels on a temple ledge. Engine rumble. Headsets on. Checklists mumble by. And then you're airborne. The sky greets you like it always does, indifferent and infinite. Today, it's clear, with that bone-white glare that makes everything look two-dimensional. An hour in, the intercom crackles. Anybody else see that? It's your waist gunner. See what? You reply. There's a plane in our formation with a painting on the nose, looks like a squirrel. A pause. Yeah, that's a nuts to you, crew. From the 92nd. They've got a new good luck charm, a taxidermied squirrel in a leather helmet. Of course they do. Supposedly, it used to hang in a gas station back in Vermont. The pilot swore it nodded at him every time he walked past. He took it as a sign. Now it's strapped behind his seat, its tiny paws permanently in a kind of salute. That's not even the weirdest airborne charm you've heard about. There's Lady Tusk, whose nose art features a glamorous elephant with lipstick. The crew carries a small ivory figurine they claim was blessed by a wandering monk in Ceylon. Probably a coconut salesman, but the belief? Unshakable. One navigator, no joke, flies with a chunk of soap carved into the shape of a rabbit. Called it clean escape. These aren't just gags. They're oxygen. Mental lifelines in a world where parachutes might be the second most important thing you carry. You check your instruments. Everything normal. Which, of course, is when the shudder hits. Not a direct hit, more like a giant invisible hand slapping the belly of your bird. The flak starts early today. Black puffs bloom around you like angry flowers. You scan the sky for movement. Then it happens, across the formation, a plane shudders, drops altitude. You squint. It's the one with the squirrel. Flak got M, someone calls over the comms. But then, like a phoenix in army green, the plane steadies. Climbs. Rejoins formation. The squirrel still saluting. You hear laughter crackle through the radio. It's not hysteria. It's survival. That little taxidermy squirrel might just be promoted to staff Lucky Charm after today. Your own plane rattles again, but holds. No damage. You pat your charm like it's done you a favor. Somewhere below, Europe stretches in burnt browns and bruised greens. There are fields, forests, towns that no longer resemble towns. Churches without roofs. Chimneys without houses. Historians still argue whether air raids did more to break morale or reinforce it through shared suffering. You don't argue. You just fly over. Later, when the bombs are away and the sky feels more air than steel, the crew settles back into that strange mid-mission quiet. Half alert, half dream state. You think about the charm you almost brought, the silver thimble your grandma gave you. Said it was a family heirloom. It had a dent in the side that matched her finger perfectly. You left it back at base. Not because you don't believe in it, but because you already had a charm. You didn't want to confuse the magic. You make a mental note to check it when you get back. Another mental note, squirrel helmet. Find out where to get one. Then you see it. Off in the far edge of vision, another squadron. Flying tight. Sharp. And on one of their bombers? A painted banner, "Kiss me, I'm enlisted." You grin. Somewhere in that plane, there's probably a crew member flying with his girlfriend's bra sewn into his jacket lining. Or a rosary knotted into his boot laces. Or a picture of Rita Hayworth folded 7 times and tucked behind a compass. And they believe. That's the key. They believe that their charm is doing something. Holding a wing in place. Distracting a flak gunner. Nudging fate a degree to the left. You look down at yours. Still warm. Still here. So are you. The next morning, you wake up feeling like a marshmallow that's been sat on by a platoon of boots. The base is quieter than usual, almost too quiet. Like the world's holding its breath. Rumors swirl. Word is that the Luftwaffe has a new ace pilot buzzing the skies. Someone nicknamed the Phantom Hawk. Doesn't show up on radar much. Strikes fast. Leaves a signature feather behind. Sounds like wartime gossip? Maybe. Or maybe it's the kind of story that pilots cling to, the way sailors tell tales of sea monsters to explain strange waves. You walk over to the briefing room, feeling the weight of your charm in your pocket. It's become like a second heartbeat. Inside, the squadron leader is speaking in that slow, measured tone, the kind that signals serious business. The Phantom Hawk has been active in our sector, he says. No confirmed kills yet, but don't underestimate him. A hush falls. Everyone exchanges looks. You hear one pilot whisper, "Lucky charm or not, better keep your eyes peeled." This brings back memories of a superstition among the RAF. Some believed that painting eyes on the tails of their planes could ward off evil spirits. The idea was that the eyes would see approaching dangers before the pilot did. Some historians argue whether this was a genuine belief or just a clever psychological trick to boost morale. You smirk, thinking about your own charm, no eyes, just a smooth, worn coin, but it's done its job so far. The briefing continues. Weather forecasts, flight paths, radio codes. You tuck it all away like mental armor. When it's over, you head toward the hangar, readying for the mission. The mechanics are humming, the engines coughing to life. The air smells of oil, smoke, and adrenaline. Before you climb in, a young pilot approaches you, nervously clutching a small wooden carving. "A token from my sister," he says softly. Says it brings calm. You nod, understanding. Everyone has their talismans. You glance at your own charm, tucked against your heart. As the engines roar, you settle into your seat, the cockpit closing in like a cocoon. You remind yourself, it's not just metal and luck, it's the stories, the hopes, the memories all woven into these little objects. The Phantom Hawk is out there, a shadow you can't yet see. But you have your charm. You have your crew. And you have the sky. The sun hangs low as you taxi toward the runway, the air heavy with anticipation. Your charm, now tucked under your flight jacket, feels like a familiar weight, a quiet reassurance amid the clatter of preparation. You exchange nods with your co-pilot, a silent pact, get through this together. Takeoff is smooth, the roar of engines blending into a calming drone. Above, the vast blue stretches endlessly, dotted with wisps of clouds. You settle into a rhythm, scanning instruments, adjusting throttle, keeping an eye on the horizon. The Phantom Hawk remains elusive, a ghost whispering through the chatter on the radio. Suddenly, the flak bursts around you, black puffs blooming like angry flowers in slow motion. Your heart races, but the charm presses against your chest as if to say, I'm here. You maneuver through the sky's chaos, the plane shuddering but steady. Your crew communicates in clipped tones, focused and calm despite the danger. Somewhere behind you, a navigator recites a quirky rhyme about the luck of pilots who carry rabbit's feet, a superstition shared and debated among airmen. Historians still argue whether these rituals truly impacted survival or simply bolstered morale. You don't have time to ponder now. The Phantom Hawk appears briefly, a streak of shadow crossing your vision before diving away. No direct encounter this time, but the tension lingers. As the mission progresses, your charm seems to weave its silent magic, grounding you amid the storm. By the time you turn for home, the sky softens into dusk, painting the clouds with gentle hues. Landing is bumpy but safe. Back on the ground, you unbuckle and run your fingers over your charm once more. In this war-torn sky, amidst the uncertainty, these small tokens carry stories, courage, and hope. You tuck yours away, ready to face another day. Night settles softly over the airfield, wrapping everything in a quiet blanket. You sit beside the flickering campfire, the warmth contrasting with the cool night air. Your charm rests on your palm, catching the firelight like a small, steadfast star. Around you, pilots share whispered stories, tales of lucky charms and close calls that seem more like miracles. One pilot swears by a faded photograph of his dog, carried tucked in his helmet lining. Another clutches a tiny carved whale, claiming it calmed turbulent skies. Historians still debate how much these charms influenced pilot psychology versus mere coincidence. You listen, comforted by the shared belief that these tokens hold some power, whether real or imagined. The conversation drifts to superstitions about lucky numbers, flight formations, and rituals performed before takeoff. A fellow airman mentions how some crews painted their planes with motifs to invoke protection. Your thoughts wander back to your own charm, worn smooth by time and touch. You trace its edges, feeling connected to the countless others who carried their own tokens into battle. The fire crackles, shadows dancing on faces tired but resolute. You realize that these charms are more than just objects, they're anchors in a chaotic world. In the stillness, you close your eyes, the charm warm against your skin. The night hums softly, a lullaby for weary souls. Dawn breaks with a slow, golden stretch across the horizon. You wake with the soft ache of yesterday's flight lingering in your muscles. The base stirs, pilots preparing, mechanics tuning, the familiar hum of readiness. Your charm feels lighter this morning, as if it's caught the warmth of the rising sun. You wander toward the mess hall, greeted by the scent of strong coffee and burnt toast. Conversations drift around you, talk of home, hope, and the strange comfort found in ritual. One pilot jokes about carrying a lucky spoon, which supposedly saved him from a crash landing. Another shares a tale of a charm lost mid-flight but mysteriously returned in the mail weeks later. Historians remain unsure whether these stories reflect chance or something deeper. You sip your coffee slowly, the bitterness grounding you. The day ahead holds its own unknowns. Your charm, like a quiet companion, reminds you that you're part of a larger story. One filled with courage, luck, and the fragile threads of hope woven through the clouds. You tuck the charm safely inside your jacket, ready to face whatever the skies will bring. The airfield is bathed in soft afternoon light, the kind that slows time just enough to catch your breath. You sit beneath a towering pine, your fingers tracing the familiar contours of your charm. It feels warm, like a heartbeat against your palm, a reminder of every mile flown, every narrow escape. Around you, the world hums with quiet determination. You think back to the countless stories shared, the rituals, the talismans, each a thread in the fabric of survival. Historians still debate how much these charms influenced outcomes, but you know their true power lies in the hope they inspire. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows, you close your eyes. The weight of the day lifts, replaced by a calm that settles deep within. Your charm rests softly against your chest, a silent promise. No matter where the next mission takes you, this small token carries the strength of all who came before. You breathe in the fading light, feeling the gentle pull of peace. And as the evening breeze whispers through the pines, you drift slowly into a world where courage and calm coexist. Where lucky charms aren't just objects, but companions on the journey through the sky. The sun sets, the stars emerge, and the night wraps the world in a gentle hush. You feel the day's tension melt away, replaced by a soft stillness. Your charm rests near your heart, its warmth fading into a quiet glow. The sky beyond your window promises rest, dreams, and the promise of tomorrow. Now, close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and drift on the wings of whispered stories and silent hopes. Sweet dreams.